The police said it was a mistake, but her daughter remembered the dog's eyes. The courtroom had been silent for most of the day. Only the shuffle of papers and the occasional clink of a water glass broke the stillness. The defense had just finished showcasing the police dog Shadow, a towering German shepherd with a perfect posture and flawless obedience. The jury had leaned forward, visibly impressed. Cameras clicked softly. Even skeptics were starting to doubt. And then, as the handler walked Shadow past the front row, something happened. A child's hand dropped her teddy bear. The girl didn't speak often. She hadn't since the raid. But now, her arm rose, and two words slipped through the stillness. Bad dog. Shadow froze. The handler pulled the leash, but the dog stepped back, ears low, tail still. No one moved. Because in that moment, a child's truth pierced through what years of rehearsed reports and court jargon had tried to cover. A truth that couldn't be coached, couldn't be silenced. And from there, everything unraveled. The clock on the microwave blinked 12:42 a.m. in pale blue digits. In the dim light of the kitchen, Camila Reyes sat hunched over her anatomy flashcards, her eyes dry and grainy, her spine curled like a comma that hadn't stood upright in years. The hum of the refrigerator blended with the distant howl of a freight train rolling through the Reveridge yard, the vibration crawling faintly up through the cracked linoleum beneath her bare feet. The walls of the apartment seemed to breathe that night, not warmly, but with a kind of tired resignation. The paint, near the floorboards, peeled like old Band-Aids, and every few minutes, the radiator sputtered in protest. But Camila didn't notice. Her mind was locked on the diagram in front of her, the circulatory system. Color-coded veins snaking across a stark white body. She recited names under her breath like prayers. Subclavian, brachial, radial. In the next room, just beyond the paper-thin wall, little Nina was asleep, her breath light and even. Camila had left the door ajar, and from her seat, she could just barely glimpse the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling above her daughter's bed. They used to fall off every night, but Nina insisted they stayed because they're braver than me. She always slept clutching the same worn plush bear, lavender in color, with one button eye missing and the stuffing escaping from its stitched paw. Camila had tried sewing it shut, but Nina didn't want it fixed. "He's still strong," she'd said once, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. Camila's head began to nod. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours in days. Between shifts at the diner, exam prep, and the constant mental math of overdue bills, fatigue sat heavy on her chest. But tonight, something else itched under her skin, a restlessness that had no name. She sat back, rolled her shoulders, and glanced at the door. Still quiet, still safe. Then, the sound. Not a knock. Not even a proper bang. It was more like the crack of thunder inside the bones of the building. Camila froze. Her pen dropped. She barely had time to rise from her chair when the second blow came harder this time, and the lock on the front door snapped like dry twigs. The apartment exploded into light, noise, chaos. Men in black tactical gear poured in like floodwater. Shouts filled the air short, mechanical bursts. "Police! Search warrant!" Camila instinctively raised her hands, backing into the kitchen table. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her mind unable to process the words. The cards scattered to the floor like fallen leaves. "My daughter, please. She's sleeping," Camila screamed. But the officers weren't listening. A beam of light struck her in the face. Another officer pinned her to the wall, his grip crushing. "Hands on your head. Do not resist," he barked, his breath sour and fast. "I'm not resisting," she cried, eyes darting toward Nina's door. "Please let me get to her." And then came the sound that would split her memory forever. A low, guttural growl. Animal, unfiltered, and full of tension. She turned just in time to see a large German shepherd rounding the hallway corner, his teeth bared, eyes wild with direction. Not instinct, direction, shadow. Before she could cry out again, the dog lunged. A searing pain tore through her leg as Shadow's jaws clamped down just below her knee. She shrieked, collapsing. Her thigh struck the corner of the table. Blood bloomed across her pajama pants. She writhed, gasping. Somewhere above the screaming, someone shouted, "Shadow, off!" And just like that, the dog released and backed away, tail wagging faintly like he'd done something right. Camila curled around her leg, sobbing, the burn of the bite overtaken by a cold, spreading panic. "Nina!" she screamed. And then she saw her. The hallway door had opened, and Nina, barefoot, in her star-print pajamas, stood like a ghost. Her eyes were wide, her mouth trembling. She clutched her bear by one ear. The pink ribbon in her hair had slipped down. "Mommy?" she whispered. One of the officers turned and strode toward the girl. "Don't touch her," Camila cried out, trying to crawl forward. But the pain was too much. "Please. She's just a baby. Don't hurt her. Please." The officer scooped Nina up, awkwardly, as if she were evidence. Nina didn't fight, just stared back at her mother as she disappeared into the hallway. Then the cold silence returned. No more shouting. No more boot stomping. Just Camila alone on the floor, bleeding, crying, and very, very afraid. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last moment she'd see her daughter for more than a day. The raid would last just 12 minutes. They'd find nothing. But the damage, the real kind, had already been done. And in the corner of the room, unnoticed, the microwave clock blinked on. 1:03 a.m. The silence after the second bang wasn't silence at all. It was a held breath a moment, stretched thin across panic and disbelief. The front door didn't open. It ruptured. Splinters flew like shrapnel. The deadbolt sheared straight out of the wood frame. Camila barely had time to cover her head as the crash of boots followed 6, maybe 7 shadows swarming through the tiny apartment like smoke, black-clad, armed, shouting words that slammed harder than fists. "Police, search warrant, hands up." The air shifted instantly. Gone was the dim warmth of midnight. Gone was the rhythm of pages turning, the hum of her thoughts. In their place, light so bright it pierced her retinas, hands grabbing, voices barking commands she couldn't process. She staggered back against the fridge, heart roaring in her ears. "My daughter!" she cried out, stumbling into the counter. "Please wait! She's sleeping!" But no one was listening. One officer shoved her down, forcing her to her knees. The linoleum dug into her skin as cold plastic cuffs tightened around her wrists. She gasped, still not understanding what was happening, why it was happening. "You have the wrong house," she pleaded, her voice already raw. A flashlight beam seared across her face. Behind it, a masked officer's jaw tightened. "Where are the drugs?" he snapped. "What? I don't have anything. I live here with my daughter. Please, just check." A deafening bark cut through the room, raw and explosive. The kind that makes the gut clench before the mind catches up. And then she saw him. From behind, one of the taller officers emerged a dog, a German shepherd, broad-shouldered, eyes locked, every muscle taut with tension. His name was stitched in bold white letters across the side of his black harness. Shadow. He didn't hesitate. The handler shouted something, a command maybe, or a mistake. Shadow lunged. Camila didn't even scream in time. She only had time to flinch, to twist half away as the weight of the animal crashed into her. His jaws found flesh, sunk into the meat of her calf like iron traps. The pain came in a flash of heat, a ragged tearing that turned her limbs to water. She collapsed. "No, no, please!" Blood spilled fast, soaking through the cotton of her pajama pants, trailing onto the tile in crimson loops. She thrashed, but it only made it worse. Shadow held fast, not wild, not chaotic, but precise. Trained, focused. As if obeying, it was the leash that finally yanked him back. One tug, one word from the officer. Off. And just like that, the dog released. He backed away, tongue out, panting softly. His tail gave a half wag, as though waiting for praise. Camila curled on her side, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. Her hands still bound. Her breath came in broken sobs, half choked on adrenaline and confusion. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, voice barely audible. "My daughter, please, where is she?" And then she saw her. In the hallway, framed by the cracked door of the bedroom, stood Nina, 4 years old, silent, frozen. She wore her favorite star-print pajamas, the ones Camila had washed twice that week because Nina said they kept the bad dreams away. Her bare feet clung to the floor. Her stuffed bear, the lavender one, with one eye dangled from her hand. The pink ribbon in her hair had fallen lopsided. Her eyes, big, wide, dark, locked onto her mother bleeding on the floor. "Mommy?" she said softly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a cry. It was something smaller. A thread stretched too tight. Camila tried to rise. Nina, baby, stay back. I'm okay, sweetheart, just stay there. But an officer had already turned. No, don't. Camila's voice cracked as she struggled forward. The cuffs cut into her wrists. The officer stepped past the trail of blood and scooped Nina into his arms like an object. The little girl didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just stared over his shoulder at her mother, her little mouth hanging open. She's scared, Camila cried. Don't take her. She doesn't understand. Please. No one answered. Nina vanished behind the black vests and night vision lenses. The pain in Camila's leg pulsed like thunder. Her vision blurred. Her heart pounded so hard it shook her ribs. And still, she lay there half on her side, blood pooling, mind racing with thoughts that had no words. She'd heard stories. From customers at the diner, from neighbors, raids gone wrong. But they were always somewhere else. Never here, never her. She heard drawers slamming, cabinets torn open, someone flipping her textbooks off the counter like they were contraband. One officer muttered, "Nothing here," and another swore under his breath. The word waste was tossed casually. Then came the scuff of boots heading toward the door. No one looked at her. No one said anything. Within seconds, they were gone as fast as they had come. Just the echo of a broken door swinging, a hallway light flickering, and the heavy stink of adrenaline. Camila lay in the stillness, cold and bleeding, her eyes locked on the smeared paw print Shadow had left beside the fridge. In that moment, time restarted, but it would never move the same way again. The fluorescent lights in the emergency room buzzed like a trapped fly overhead, flickering every few seconds as if uncertain they had the energy to stay awake. Camila Reyes lay on a narrow hospital bed with cold sheets and warm blood. Her leg was propped on a metal tray lined with paper that had long since soaked through, and the air stank faintly of antiseptic, rust, and something she couldn't name, something like defeat. A nurse, middle-aged and wordless, worked silently over the wound. She wore glasses that sat too low on her nose and disposable gloves that crinkled with every movement. Her touch wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either, just methodical, distant, like someone wrapping a broken chair leg. Camila winced as the saline hit the bite again. It was deep, jagged. It throbbed not just with pain, but memory. She gripped the edges of the bed and swallowed the scream that tried to escape. No one had told her anything yet. Not about Nina, not about charges, not even why the police had come. The only thing they gave her was silence and stitches. The nurse finally spoke, but not to her. 6 punctures, tissue bruising, might need antibiotics, she said to the clipboard, not lifting her eyes. Then, as if out of obligation, she glanced down at Camila's blood-stained pants. Do you have anyone who can bring you clean clothes? Camila shook her head slowly. Where's my daughter? The nurse paused for a beat too long, then shrugged. You'll have to ask the attending. She didn't. Because none ever came. Time blurred. Minutes stretched. The room emptied. Eventually, someone brought her water and a plastic cup of pills. Ibuprofen. She stared at them for a long time before taking them, as if they might answer her instead. At 5:23 a.m., the door creaked open again. This time, a woman in a gray blouse stepped in, holding a slim black tablet and a face that had been trained to not flinch. Her badge read, Reveridge Child Protective Services. Her tone was clipped, eyes alert but uninterested. Miss Reyes? Camila tried to sit up straighter, but her body refused. Her voice cracked from disuse. Where's my daughter? Is she safe? She's fine, the woman replied, already swiping something on the screen. She was placed into emergency care last night, a temporary placement home vetted by the county. Standard protocol in these situations. Camila blinked. What situations? There was an active narcotics warrant issued for your address, the woman said flatly, like reading from a form. Due to the presence of a minor during a high-risk law enforcement action and your subsequent detainment, emergency custody was enacted to protect the child's well-being. She was crying. Camila whispered. She didn't understand. None of that was supposed to happen. They had the wrong address. There are no drugs. I'm a nursing student. I work double shifts. That's not something I can determine at this time, the woman interrupted, tapping her screen again. Your temporary custody rights have been suspended pending review. Once the police file their formal statement and internal documentation, the case will be assessed by a family court representative. I didn't do anything, Camila said again, as if saying it softly would make it clearer. The woman didn't respond. Instead, she added, if you can provide legal representation, the initial hearing can be expedited within 5 to 7 business days. Camila tried to swing her legs off the bed and nearly cried out from the pain. She's 4. She's never been away from me a night in her life. I don't even know where she is. The woman shifted her weight uncomfortably, but her voice didn't change. You will be notified of the caregiver's identity once the paperwork is finalized and background checks clear. I'm her mother, Camila said. I don't have a record. I've never even been arrested. They broke into my house. That dog attacked me in front of her. And now I'm the one being treated like... She couldn't find the word, but the silence filled it in for her. The problem. The woman gave a practiced nod. You'll be contacted when the file is reviewed. And with that, she turned and left. The door clicked shut. Camila sat there, leg bandaged and burning, cuffs now replaced by gauze. She listened to the clock tick above the sink. The IV bag shift slightly on its hook. The whir of something mechanical just beyond the curtain. All around her, machines and fluorescent light filled the space where Nina's voice should have been. Her body hurt. Her leg pulsed. But none of it compared to the ache in her chest. Not once had anyone asked what happened. Not one person, nurse, officer, social worker had looked her in the eyes long enough to really see her. To them, she was a name on a file, a mother on hold, a suspect with no badge to flash and no title to defend her. She reached over the edge of the bed where the nurse had dropped off her personal belongings in a clear plastic bag. Phone, wallet. The rubber band that had once held up Nina's ponytail, now streaked with a smear of red. Camila clutched it in her hand and lowered her face to her knees. The sobs came slowly, like water through cracks. She didn't cry out. She didn't scream. She just wept the way someone weeps when they realize there is no one to call. And no one coming, not yet. The courtroom was too quiet for a Monday. Wood-paneled walls absorbed the sound of shifting coats, creaking shoes, the nervous flutter of notepads turning in the back row. Reporters filled the benches with quiet reverence, pens poised, cameras at their feet like sleeping dogs waiting for a command. At the defense table sat Jonathan Pierce, back straight, hands folded, the knot of his tie impossibly tight. His suit was dark navy, tailored, pressed to perfection. It had taken him nearly an hour to choose it that morning. He'd owned dozens of uniforms over the years, but this civilian armor felt heavier. No badge rested on his chest, no K9 patch on his shoulder, and no shadow by his side. For the first time in 14 years, Pierce entered a public building not as an officer, not as a leader, not as a man protected by the blue wall, but as a defendant. The silence around him wasn't out of respect. It was tension, watching, waiting. He tried not to glance at the people behind the rail, but the urge was primal. Some of the faces were familiar colleagues, community members, maybe someone who once shook his hand after a school demonstration. He remembered the ribbon cutting for the new station wing 5 years ago. The children clapping, Shadow sitting perfectly still beside him, tongue out, posing for a local reporter's lens. The photo had run on the front page. Our town's guardian. Now those same eyes followed him differently. Not admiration, not even anger. Just the sterile stillness of strangers unsure if they'd been lied to. His lawyer, Carl Denning, leaned over and whispered something. Pierce nodded without listening. Denning always spoke like he was 2 moves ahead, like the courtroom was a chessboard and everyone else had brought checkers. It had worked for a long time. But lately, even Denning's voice sounded unsure. Across the aisle, the prosecution table stirred. Files shifted. Chairs scraped. Pierce looked over once, just once, and saw her, Camila Reyes, the woman from the apartment, the one who wouldn't stop screaming, the one he barely remembered seeing at all until the paperwork landed in his inbox. She looked smaller in person, thinner than he recalled. Her leg was bandaged beneath her skirt, wrapped in a dull white brace. Her eyes, though they were fixed and sharp, not the eyes of a victim looking for pity, they were the eyes of someone who remembered every second. Beside her sat a little girl with dark curls tied into loose pigtails, a pink bear tucked under her arm. Nina, if he remembered correctly. 4 years old. Too young to testify, too young to understand the legal jargon, the politics, the strategy. But not too young to remember. Pierce shifted in his seat. He should have brought Shadow, at least for the optics, at least for familiarity. But Denning had warned him. You don't walk a dog into a courtroom after an accusation like this, not even if he's Lassie. So Pierce came alone, as advised. But without the dog, he felt exposed. There had been a time when the name Jonathan Pierce meant something in Reveridge. He'd led the narcotics task force for nearly a decade, overseen 73 raids, 112 arrests, 9 commendations. He'd trained with Homeland Security, flown out to a canine conference in Denver as a keynote speaker. Everyone in town knew Pierce and Shadow. You couldn't open the local paper without seeing them beside a bag of seized drugs or a retired veteran being honored at the county fair. But that morning, the courthouse bulletin board didn't have his photo, only a docket number and a list of charges. He straightened as the bailiff called the room to order. The judge hadn't entered yet, but the formality pressed down like a weight. He hated the stillness of courtrooms, how everything moved slower, how every second dragged. Raids were loud, immediate, fast. You kicked the door, gave the order, watched the dog move, read the room in half a heartbeat. That was where he belonged, where everything had purpose. Here, the seconds bloomed with ambiguity. They're going to bring up the bite, Denning whispered, flipping a page in his folder. They'll try to paint it as deliberate. We stick to protocol. Shadow responded to perceived threat. Period. Pierce nodded, but his jaw was tight. Because he knew, deep down, buried in a part of him he hadn't touched in years, he knew Shadow didn't bite unless he told him to. There was no perceived threat in the eyes of that dog. There was only the handler's word. One command. One syllable. And teeth. The courtroom door opened behind them. A few heads turned. It wasn't the judge, just someone from the media sneaking in late. But it made Pierce flinch. Every noise did now, Denning noticed. You okay? Pierce nodded again. He wasn't. He remembered a photo in his desk drawer, the one they never published. Shadow as a pup, barely 4 months old, eyes too big for his head. He remembered the first time the dog sat without being told, the first drug bust they made together, the first time he used the word partner and meant it. He used to trust Shadow more than he trusted people. Now, he wasn't sure Shadow still trusted him. A buzzer sounded overhead. The side door opened. The judge entered in her robes, stone-faced and unreadable. All rise. Everyone stood. And as Pierce rose with them, he felt the courtroom's attention lean in just a little closer. Today, the man in blue wasn't wearing blue at all, and nobody clapped when he entered the room. The first thing the prosecutor did was pause. Not the awkward kind of pause that begged for attention, but the kind that made people hold their breath without realizing it, like the hush before a storm cloud opens or a name is whispered in church. Danielle Avery, lead prosecutor for the county, stood in the well of the courtroom with both hands resting lightly on the table's edge. Her blazer was dark charcoal. Her hair, tightly braided. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she finally spoke, her words fell into the stillness like iron dropped in water. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, her voice calm but deliberate. You will hear a great deal about policy in the days ahead. About police training, canine procedure, command structure. But this case is not about procedure. She turned slightly, eyes sweeping across the jury box. It's about power, and how it was used carelessly and without accountability in a moment when the only people present were a single mother, her 4-year-old daughter, and a dog trained to follow orders. At the plaintiff's table, Camila Reyes sat stiffly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The courtroom air was too cold. Her shoulders had been tense since sunrise. The soft brace on her leg pressed beneath her skirt like a reminder she didn't need. She wasn't sure what was worse, the pain, or the weight of everyone's eyes sliding toward her. Beside her, Nina sat still. The little girl didn't fidget, didn't look around. Her purple stuffed bear was tucked under one arm, its worn ear resting on the table. Nina's dark eyes stayed focused downward, tracing slow, invisible lines across the wood surface with her fingertip. She hadn't spoken since they walked into the courthouse, but Camila could feel her daughter's heartbeat through the air between them. Fast, shallow, fragile. She was not resisting, Avery continued, now gesturing to the screen behind her where the words, Use of Force Incident Report, 11:48 p.m., 42 Marin Avenue were displayed. There were no weapons in the home, no contraband, not even a traffic ticket. And yet, an officer with over a decade of experience allowed or ordered his K-9 to attack a woman without cause in front of her child. A few jurors shifted in their seats. One older woman in the second row pressed her lips together tightly. Camila felt a drop of sweat slide down her spine. She didn't look at Pierce. She hadn't since he walked in. She couldn't. There was something more painful than the memory of his voice that night, louder even than the command to the dog. It was the fact that he had barely looked at her then, and he still didn't now. Avery clicked a button. Another slide appeared. Here, she said, is the official incident report filed by Officer Jonathan Pierce 2 hours after the raid. You'll see it contains a number of omissions, most notably, no mention of a bite wound, no medical emergency, no emotional trauma to the minor present. You'll hear arguments that this was an oversight, but what you will see, and what the evidence will show, is that this was a deliberate erasure. A pause, and it is not the first time. Gasps didn't erupt, but the room shifted. You could feel the ripple, a collective recalibration of what this trial might actually uncover. Behind the defense table, Denning's jaw tightened. Avery continued, stepping lightly toward the jury. Now, you'll hear the defense speak of fast-moving environments, of discretion, of perceived threat. But when you are trained to control a dog with a single word, a dog that can crush a human leg in seconds, that discretion becomes deadly when abused. Camila lowered her eyes for a moment. Her fingertips dug into her palms. She had replayed that night 100 times. The bang. The roar of boots. The way Shadow had come toward her. Without hesitation. Without even barking first. She remembered the heat of his breath on her skin. The tearing. The sound Nina made, not a scream. Just a high-pitched mommy that had somehow broken something permanent in Camila's chest. Avery stopped in front of the jury box. You will hear expert testimony, she said softly. You'll see photos of Camila Reyes' injury. You'll read transcripts. But what I ask you to remember most is a child, 4 years old, taken from her bed, watching her mother bleed on the floor, placed into protective custody without a word. Her voice didn't crack, but something in it bent slightly just enough to let in a thread of grief. That child is here, sitting quietly, clutching the only bear that wasn't ripped away from her that night. She didn't point. She didn't have to. Every head turned. Nina didn't look up, but the bear in her arms shifted slightly, held just a little closer. Camila felt something pull tight behind her eyes. Avery nodded, then turned toward the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. She walked back to her seat and sat down. And for a moment, the courtroom didn't move. Not until Judge Merrill cleared her throat and looked toward the defense table. Mr. Denning, you may proceed with your opening. The spotlight shifted. But the mood did not. Camila's gaze remained fixed forward. Nina rested her cheek against the bear. And Jonathan Pierce, the man once called a hero, reached for his water glass with a hand that didn't feel quite steady anymore. The courthouse steps had never seen this many cameras. Tripods jutted like spines from the concrete. Reporters stood in tight clusters, murmuring into microphones with furrowed brows and perfectly timed pauses. Above them, boom mics swung in semicircles, catching every syllable that floated into the morning air like heat off pavement. It wasn't just the press anymore. It was everyone. A woman in a denim jacket stood near the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, voice sharp. She's lying, she said to no one in particular, but loud enough for someone to agree. If Camila Reyes didn't have something to hide, they wouldn't have raided her place. Come on, you don't just get bit by a police dog for no reason. Easy for you to say, replied an older man nearby. His cane tapped the sidewalk as he shifted his stance. That cop's been given a free pass for years. You remember what happened to Tyrell Warner on Maple Street? Got his wrist broken and the charges disappeared. Same task force. That was different. The woman snapped. He was resisting. The man shook his head. You keep saying that like it makes the bruises disappear. Across the street, a local bakery had taped handwritten signs inside its front window. One read, "We stand with Officer Pierce, Reverege's finest." Just beneath it, someone had taped a second sign overnight. It was smaller, written on notebook paper. And who stands with Nina? By noon, a small crowd had gathered outside the metal barricades that separated the courthouse from the sidewalk. Some held folded arms and tight jaws. Others carried signs. One teenager had drawn a cartoon of a German shepherd beside the words, "Good dog, wrong orders." Some shook their heads at the message. Some nodded. No one was silent. Inside, the courtroom had emptied for recess. Camila stood in the hallway, gripping the edge of a vending machine for balance. Her leg throbbed beneath the brace. Nina was with a court-appointed child advocate now, being offered juice and crayons in a side room. Camila had kissed her forehead before they took her, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's right here." She didn't know if Nina believed her anymore. Down the corridor, Pierce stood with his attorney near the water fountain. He kept his eyes low, as if examining the tile could somehow keep the noise outside from seeping through the walls. But it did. The courthouse windows weren't thick enough to drown it out. Not today. "Can't say I'm surprised," murmured a voice near the clerk's desk. Camila turned. Two women were speaking in hushed tones, one of them in a county-issued badge lanyard. She didn't catch the whole exchange, but she heard enough. "Always too clean for someone in narcotics. My brother said he used to unplug his body cam on raids, just in case. You think it's true?" "I think it's possible." Just like that, the crack widened. Jonathan Pierce had spent years cultivating a persona disciplined, loyal, decorated. He wore the badge like armor. He spoke at school assemblies, took photos with children, taught his dog to high five. But beneath the surface, the stories had been there, buried under bureaucracy, smoothed over by reports marked confidential. Now they leaked like hairline fractures in stained glass. A retired officer known only by his call sign, Ward 9, had given a brief anonymous interview the night before on a local podcast. He hadn't named names, but the implications were clear. Some handlers train dogs to protect, he had said. Others train them to intimidate. The clip had gone viral by breakfast, and the public, once comfortable in its certainty, now twisted under the weight of uncertainty. Back outside, a young woman held her phone up to live stream the courthouse steps. Her caption read, "Number Camila deserves justice." A man commented underneath, "Bet she planted the story. I trust the dog over her." "Him?" Another reply came just seconds later. "Bet the dog remembers what really happened. And so does her kid." Two truths. One town. No peace. Inside, Pierce leaned toward Denning. His voice was tight. "They're turning." Denning adjusted his tie. "Not yet. Don't panic. I saw the bakery window. You want to win hearts or beat a charge?" Denning muttered. "Focus." But Pierce wasn't focused. He was unraveling not fast, not publicly, but internally, cell by cell. Because no matter how many medals he'd received, no matter how many plaques still hung in the hallway at East Division, all it took was one little girl with a quiet stare and a purple bear to shift the entire narrative. Camila felt it too. As she limped back toward the courtroom doors, she passed a young officer leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone. He looked up. For a second, their eyes met. He didn't glare. He didn't smile. He looked unsure. And that, somehow, was more powerful than hate. Because if doubt had finally reached the walls of Reveridge PD, then maybe, just maybe, truth had begun to echo. Even if softly. Even if through cracks. The mirror in Camila's bathroom was cracked at the corner. Not shattered, just a thin fracture running diagonally like a hairline scar. It caught the light from the bare bulb above, bending her reflection ever so slightly, as if the version of her staring back was someone else. Someone warped. Someone worn down. She gripped the porcelain sink with both hands, knuckles white, arms locked, her breath loud in the silence. It had started again. That rising pressure in her chest. The spinning behind her eyes. The way her fingers tingled, like someone had tied invisible threads around them and pulled tight. Her mouth went dry. The walls pressed in. She'd made it home from court. That was supposed to be the hard part. But this was the part no one saw. Behind her, down the hall, the television murmured something from a local channel's soft cartoon voices meant to soothe children. Now only a low hum of color and noise in an apartment that felt hollow. Nina hadn't said a word all day. Not on the car ride home. Not while Camila reheated the same soup twice. Not when Camila offered her juice, or sat beside her on the rug, pretending to play. She just nodded when asked simple things, blinked when spoken to, like she'd folded herself in. Camila's eyes stung. The panic flared higher. She looked down, her right leg bandaged, still swollen, pulsed under the weight of her body. She'd stopped taking the painkillers, not because they didn't help, but because they made her too foggy to respond when Nina cried out in her sleep. Camila had only gotten her daughter back 2 days ago, and yet, somehow, she still felt like she was losing her. A gasp broke in her throat, not loud, not sharp, more like a sob that had given up halfway. She reached for the towel rack, missed, and slid to the tile floor. Cold crept through her thin leggings. Her leg ached from the impact. Her fingers curled into the floor like claws. Breathe. In. Out. Steady. But her lungs wouldn't cooperate. Her body wouldn't forget. Because she remembered the door breaking open. She remembered the shouting. She remembered the way Shadow's body came at her, how fast he moved, how quiet, how his eyes didn't even blink as he latched onto her. She remembered Nina's voice, soft and sharp and afraid. "Mommy?" And then she remembered what came after. Not just the blood, but the stillness. The way Nina sat on the hospital chair hours later, holding her bear, not speaking, not crying, not blinking. That was the part Camila couldn't forget. That silence. Not even Shadow's bite had cut that deep. There were no stitches for what had been done to them. No gauze for that kind of wound. No one in a white coat had handed her instructions titled, "How to Heal a Child Who's Seen Too Much." She pressed the heel of her palm against her forehead, trying to breathe through it. The sound of her own breath was too loud, too sharp. Her body felt like a stranger's, tense in all the wrong places. And then feet, tiny ones. Soft, slow steps down the hall. She froze. Through the open bathroom door, a small figure appeared. Nina stood quietly in her pajama pants and oversized t-shirt, one sock on, the other foot bare. Her bear dragged slightly behind her. She didn't speak. She just looked at her mother, curled on the floor. Camila straightened instinctively, wiped at her eyes, tried to smile. "Hi, baby," she whispered, her voice wrecked. "You couldn't sleep?" Nina didn't answer. She padded into the bathroom, sat down cross-legged beside her mother without a word, and leaned her shoulder against Camila's arm. Just that. No questions, no sound, just warmth. Camila closed her eyes. Something in her chest cracked open, not all the way, not enough to fall apart, but enough to let the air in. She rested her hand lightly over Nina's. Her daughter's fingers were cold. But they didn't pull away. Outside, traffic moved faintly on the main road. A siren sounded somewhere in the distance, rising and falling like a wave. Camila flinched. Nina didn't. She only curled a little closer, resting her head against her mother's side. The panic didn't vanish, but it faded just a little. Camila looked at the cracked mirror again. For the first time in weeks, she didn't look away. Because the reflection staring back wasn't just hers. It was theirs. Broken. Still healing. Still here. The apartment smelled faintly of boiled rice and overcooked peas. Camila stirred the pot gently, not because the food needed it, but because the motion kept her hands from trembling. The rhythmic clink of the wooden spoon against the saucepan was soft, steady, a small sound in a world that had been too loud. Across the room, Nina sat on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest, her purple bear tucked snugly under one arm. The same bear she'd carried out of the courthouse. The same one she'd refused to wash, despite the bloodstain on its side. The ear on the left drooped limply, stuffing peeking out near the seam. Camila had offered to fix it 3 times. Nina had shaken her head each time. "He's still strong," she'd whispered once, barely audible. Camila never asked again. She set 2 plates on the coffee table, nothing fancy. Just white rice, peas, and 2 small pieces of baked chicken from the freezer. She added 1 fork to each, then pulled a folded napkin into her lap as she sat across from her daughter on the rug. They hadn't eaten together at the table since the night before the raid. That table still stood by the kitchen window, but Nina wouldn't go near it, so the floor became their new normal. Camila smiled gently, careful not to overdo it. "Dinner's ready, sweetie." Nina looked up, but didn't speak. Her eyes went to the plate, then to her bear. She didn't move. Camila took a bite of rice, small, unhurried, then another. The food was dry, but she kept chewing. She made a small show of enjoying it, even if her stomach felt like stone. Across the room, the old wall heater buzzed on, sputtering like it didn't know how to be warm anymore. Camila swallowed and tried again. "Remember that time we made pancakes and they stuck to the ceiling fan?" Her voice was soft, almost playful. "I think we're still finding syrup in places." Nina blinked slowly. Her expression didn't change. Camila pushed the chicken a little closer to her. "Just 2 bites," she said gently. "That's our rule, remember? Then we can leave the rest for tomorrow." Nina shifted slightly. Her fingers ran across the bear's worn fur. Then outside. A bark. Not sharp, not aggressive. Just the distant sound of a dog down the street, one of the neighbors, maybe barking at shadows or birds or wind. But it might as well have been thunder. Nina stiffened instantly. Her fork clattered to the carpet. Her body folded in on itself. Tiny shoulders hunched, her head tucked low, her arms wrapped tight around the bear. Camila dropped her plate and crawled toward her. "It's okay," she whispered, trying not to move too fast. "That's not him. That's just another dog, baby. Not Shadow. Just a normal dog outside." Nina didn't cry. She didn't scream. She only curled tighter. And then, her voice came soft as breath, barely more than a shape in the air. "Dog. Bad." Camila froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't heard her daughter say that phrase out loud since the hospital, since the moment she'd watched a CPS worker lift Nina out of her arms without explanation. Dog bad. The words hung there between them, as fragile and profound as a confession. Camila nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, voice cracking. "That one was." She reached out a hand, not to pull, not to fix, just to rest it gently on Nina's shoulder. Her daughter didn't flinch. It was the first moment of trust she'd felt in days. Camila took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You know," she said softly, "your bear's got one ear, but he still listens, doesn't he?" Nina's head moved just slightly. A small nod. Almost invisible. Camila smiled. "That's kinda like you. You hear things even when no one else is listening." Nina didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. They stayed like that for a while, kneeling on the carpet. The dinner forgotten. The outside world muffled. Eventually, Nina lifted her head and turned her bear toward Camila. Her tiny fingers brushed the torn ear, then pressed it gently into her mother's palm. Camila felt the threadbare cloth, warm from her daughter's grip. "He's not scared," Nina said quietly. Camila looked at her. "And you?" Nina looked down, then almost too soft to hear, "Sometimes." Camila exhaled. "Me too." She leaned forward, touching her forehead lightly to Nina's. No tears. Just closeness. She didn't ask more, didn't push, because trust was a thread, thin, frayed, precious. And tonight, just for a moment, they were holding the same end. The legal aid office smelled like old carpet and reheated coffee. Flickering fluorescent lights lined the low ceiling, buzzing faintly like tired insects. A ceiling fan spun overhead but did nothing to move the heavy air. On the wall, a faded poster read, "Equal Justice for All," but the edges had curled away from the drywall. Camila Reyes sat on a cracked faux leather chair in the waiting area, her brace peeking beneath her jeans, one crutch resting loosely beside her. Nina sat next to her with her legs tucked under her, one hand buried in the fur of her bear, the other tracing lazy circles on her mother's knee. They had been waiting for 37 minutes. Camila didn't glance at the clock again. She just stared at the scuffed tile, jaw clenched. She hadn't wanted a court-appointed attorney. She hadn't wanted to be here at all. But after 3 voicemails left unanswered by private firms and one legal assistant who suggested maybe taking a plea, she'd said yes. She didn't need a hero. She needed someone to listen. The door creaked open. A young man leaned out. Early 30s, if that. Rolled sleeves. Pinstripe tie loosened. Not sloppily, just honest. His face was clean-shaven, but tired in the eyes, the kind of tired that came from reading too much and not enough light. "Camila Reyes?" he asked. She stood carefully. "That's me." He held the door. "Elijah Moore. Come on in." They entered a small office with 2 chairs, 1 window, and a desk stacked with folders like a miniature skyline. He waved toward the chair across from his. You can bring your daughter if you'd like." Camila hesitated. "She'll be quiet." That's fine," he said, lowering himself into his own chair. "Quiet kids tend to notice the most, in my experience." Nina settled on the edge of the seat, bare in her lap, eyes wide but unreadable. Elijah glanced briefly at her, then back at Camila. He opened a folder, clicked a pen, then paused. "I've read your file," he said, "but I'd like to hear it from you." Camila studied him for a second. His voice wasn't warm, but it was real. She told him everything. Slowly, carefully. From the first knock to the moment they took Nina from her arms. Her hands shook. Her voice caught in places. But she didn't cry. Not once. Elijah didn't interrupt. He didn't nod or offer sympathy. He just listened, pen hovering but rarely moving. When she finished, she sat back and waited the same way you wait after dropping a stone down a well, listening for the echo that tells you how deep the darkness goes. Elijah exhaled. "This isn't negligence," he said. "It's orchestration." Camila blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means someone knew how to write a clean report. Someone who's done it before. The language is too careful, too clinical. They list escalated behavior, but no detail. No timestamps. No officer IDs next to the physical force entries. It's a shell." Camila's eyes narrowed. "They're saying I was hostile." He flipped to another page. "They're saying you resisted instructions, which is conveniently vague. No mention of a dog bite. No mention of injury. But they cuffed me. I was bleeding." "I know. Doesn't that matter?" "It does now." He closed the folder and leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. "Camila," he said quietly, "I've seen people walk away from worse. If no one pushes, the system resets. It just goes quiet again. That's what it's built to do." She didn't answer. She looked down at Nina. Her daughter sat perfectly still, chin tucked into the curve of her bear. She hadn't looked up once. Not when Camila spoke, not when Elijah answered. But Camila saw the way her daughter's little fingers curled tighter every time they said the word dog. Camila turned back to Elijah. "You think they'll win?" He didn't blink. "They usually do." She leaned forward. "Then we don't give them usual." There it was. In her voice, not loud, not fiery, but absolute. That quiet line between giving up and refusing. "I won't let them bury this," she said. Elijah didn't smile, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of alignment. Recognition. "Then neither will I." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and clicked his pen again. "Let's start by getting you a copy of the raid authorization. I want to know who signed it. And then we go through Pierce's file, every prior K-9 deployment, every missing minute of footage. Something's in there." Camila watched him scribble something in shorthand. She didn't understand it, but she understood the intent. He believed her, not because she cried, not because of her daughter, but because she refused to be erased. Nina looked up then, just for a second. Her eyes met Elijah's. He gave her a small nod. And for the first time in days, Camila saw her daughter exhale. Like maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't done listening. The file room at the Reveridge County Legal Archive smelled like dust and heat and too many years stacked on too few shelves. Elijah Moore stood at the center of it, his sleeves rolled up, a pencil behind one ear and a growing ache behind his eyes. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the silence, and a small industrial fan rotated from a metal stand in the corner, doing almost nothing. The manila folders in front of him were aged brittle at the corners, some creased like they'd been opened in a hurry and never properly closed. He'd been there for hours, chasing shadows in print. Outside, the sun had risen, stalled, and begun to dip again. But inside this room, time didn't move. Not really. It just layered. He reached for another file from box, 12 Ampere East Division Narcotics Task Force, 2017 to 2021, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned quickly. Warrant dates, K-9 deployment codes, audio logs, timestamps, chain of command notations. Every raid had a file, but not every file had truth in it. He knew that now. He'd spent the last 3 days buried in police reports, subpoenaed documents, and redacted summaries. But today was the first time the pattern blinked at him like a missed heartbeat. He set the file down and pulled out another. Incident report, the 18th of November, 2021. Camila's case. The summary was short, too short. One printed page, no supplemental attachments. He flipped it open. His pen paused midair. There it was, the first fracture. Date of entry, the 19th of November, 2021, 4:47 a.m. Time of raid, the 18th of November, 2021, 11:48 p.m. Approval timestamp, November 17, 2018, 3:06 p.m. That couldn't be right. He double-checked. A report signed after the raid, but with an approval date that preceded it by nearly 30 hours? That was either a typo or something worse. He flipped through the attached officer statements. Pierce, J. Clemens, R. Gale, M. All brief. Clinical. Language recycled from other reports. Subject displayed agitated behavior. Environment unstable. Canine responded to escalation. Nothing about Camila being unarmed. Nothing about a bite. No notation about a minor on scene. No reference to the injury. No photo logs. No body cam timestamps. He sat back in his chair. There should have been at least 3 supplemental attachments. Asterisk. Body cam footage summary. Asterisk EMS medical incident notation. Knähandla evaluation. None were included. That's not omission. That's surgical absence. He ran a hand over his face. The clerk had said it plainly when he'd signed the access form. We only keep what they give us. If something's missing, they either didn't file it or didn't want to. He opened the drawer again, pulled out Box 9 DK9 deployment logs. He flipped through the tabs until he found the one marked SHDW-093 Shadows ID. Elijah scanned the logs for the week of the 14th of November 20. One entry. Only one. Dated the 15th of November, a warehouse search with no contact reported. Nothing for the 18th. The form that should have documented Shadow's actions at Camila's apartment wasn't there. Not even backdated. Not even forged. Just missing. Elijah stood abruptly and crossed to the front desk where a clerk in a green cardigan and smudged glasses sat behind a plexiglass divider. Hey, sorry, quick question, he said, keeping his voice measured. Is there a supplemental database for deployment forms that don't make it into the official archive? The clerk looked up from her Sudoku. Not unless they're flagged for review or internal audit, she said. Why? I've got a K9 incident officer, Pierce, the 18th of November, and there's no deployment record logged. That's not normal, right? She frowned. Shadow? That dog? He was their flagship. They logged everything. Not this. She tapped on her keyboard with 2 fingers slowly. After a minute, she shook her head. Nothing showing. Elijah thanked her and returned to the table. He sat for a long moment, the fluorescent lights buzzing behind his thoughts. Then he opened his notebook and began writing. Notes. Asterisk raid timestamp doesn't match approval trail. Nueva deployment. Form missing. Asterisk. No medical record attached. Asterisk. Body cam summary. Absent. Asterisk. Language in Pierce's report identical to prior 2019 raid log. Copy, paste, phrasing. He underlined the last line twice. If Pierce had done this before, it wouldn't be an isolated event. It would be a pattern. And if it was a pattern, they could bring it into court. He flipped the notebook closed and looked at the single-page report again. So clean, so professional, so hollow. His phone buzzed. A text from Camila. Nina asked if the dog still remembers her. What do I say? Elijah stared at the screen, then typed back, tell her memory doesn't go away. But this time, it's going to protect her. He gathered the files, shoved the boxes back into the shelf, and slung his bag over his shoulder. As he left the archive, the door clicked shut behind him. And somewhere inside the system, a crack had just begun to widen. There's a silence that follows truth, when it finally begins to surface, not loud, not triumphant, but brittle, like frost forming on a window pane. It crept around Elijah Moore as he stood on the porch of a weather-worn house on the south side of Reveridge, waiting for someone to open the door. The woman who answered wore a sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big, sleeves pulled down over her hands. Her eyes narrowed as she looked past him, as if checking whether he'd come alone. Elijah Moore, he said quietly, holding up his card. Public Defender's Office. I'm working on the Camila Reyes case. The woman, maybe late 30s, gave a short, bitter laugh. "And what do you want with me?" He didn't flinch. "Your name came up in the task force reports from 2018. You filed a use of force complaint involving Officer Pierce and a K-9 unit." "I didn't file anything," she said. "That's the point." A pause. "I tried." She let the door swing open wider, just enough for him to see the corners of a child's painting taped to the wall. A house, a stick figure mom, and a black dog drawn with sharp, frantic strokes. "Come in," she said. "But don't stay long." Her name was Cassandra Vicks, and her voice shook more from memory than from anger. The night she remembered, the 4th of April, 2018, had begun with music, a backyard birthday party for her niece. A neighbor had called in a noise complaint. By the time she realized it wasn't just patrol officers knocking, but a raid squad, it was too late. They said they had a warrant, said someone saw a gun on the porch. "I don't even own a damn gun." Her lip trembled. "One of the officers, Pierce. He didn't talk much. But the dog didn't need a reason." She pulled up her pant leg. Still there. A scar, deep and white, puckered just above her ankle. "No commands. No warning. Just teeth." Elijah swallowed. "Did you try to report it?" "I was in the hospital for 3 days. When I got out, I went down to internal affairs. But someone had already logged a report, said I ran, said I resisted. They told me if I pushed it, I could be charged with obstruction. Then someone came by. From the city attorney's office." She looked away. "They said if I signed a settlement agreement, my medical bills would be covered. Told me it'd be easier for my son if we moved on." Oh, she tapped the scar. "Easy doesn't mean healed." Over the next 3 days, Elijah traced the names buried in the margins of old K-9 deployment logs. Each one came with a whisper, a pattern, a silence so loud it left a ring in his ears. A young man named Deshaun Briggs arrested outside a convenience store in 2019. His file listed aggressive response to K-9 command. But the shop owner said Deshaun never moved, just froze when the dog lunged. He'd taken the settlement. Moved away. Then a woman in her 50s, Janice Roby, bitten in her own driveway. They were searching her neighbor's house, but Shadow crossed into her yard. Her dog barked. Shadow reacted. She screamed. He bit. No charges were filed. But she signed a waiver. Non-disclosure. 6 cases. 7 victims. All different on paper. All the same in truth. No body cam footage, no follow-up discipline. Same dog, same handler, same erasures. In his small office, Elijah laid the papers out on the floor like puzzle pieces. Each report had the same structure, blunt, generic language. K-9 perceived threat. Handler issued verbal cues. Subject non-compliant. But there was no independent verification, no civilian recordings, no alternate testimonies logged. In most, there were technical errors in bodycam timestamps. A few were simply blank. And always it ended with silence. A quiet deal. A medical payout. A file closed before it could breathe. He circled the name Shadow 6 times and read. This wasn't just about one mistake. It was institutional. Protected. Repeated. Pierce wasn't just an officer who'd gone too far one night. He was the endpoint of a system that had been trained to look away. That night, Elijah met Camila outside the community center. Nina clung to her leg, silent but curious, a small Band-Aid on her cheek from a fall that morning. He knelt beside her gently. "Hey, Pequeña," he said. "I heard you were brave again this week." Nina didn't speak, but she looked at him. That was enough. Then he turned to Camila. "I need you to see something." He handed her a folder, thin, stapled, quiet. She flipped it open. Victim photos, deployment logs, redacted names. And then, the scar on Cassandra Vicks's ankle, the bandage on Deshaun's shoulder, the note from Janice Roby's non-disclosure agreement. Camila's lips parted. "How many?" "At least 7, Elijah said. "That we can trace. Might be more. Probably are." She didn't speak for a long time, then. "And they buried every one of them." He nodded. "But not this time," she said. Her voice had no volume, but it had weight. Somewhere across town, in a small locked storage closet inside the Reveridge Police Department, a box labeled Archive K-9 Unit Vertical Bar 2016-2021 gathered dust. It contained a disc, footage, of a night never meant to be seen, and a dog with perfect obedience but not perfect judgment. One who had been trained not just to act, but to be trusted without question. The phone rang once. Then again, Elijah stared at the screen, blinking in the soft glow of his desk lamp. It was nearly midnight, and his apartment had already surrendered to the silence of late hours, the kind of quiet that made old floorboards creak louder and shadows stretch longer. He hesitated before answering. The number was unknown. No name, no ID, just instinct. He pressed the green circle. Elijah Moore? The voice was male, strained, young, maybe late 20s. This is Moore. A pause. You're the one working the Reyes case? Elijah straightened in his chair. Depends on who's asking. I used to wear the badge. Not anymore. The voice cracked like it hadn't spoken freely in years. You don't know me, but I saw what you released today, the names, the deployment patterns. You're missing someone. Someone who got out before the rest of us even knew what was going on. Elijah's pulse quickened. Who? Another pause. Then, Grace Lormont. Used to be internal affairs. She tried to raise flags. Got pushed out quiet. You won't find her name in any press release. Elijah reached for a pen. Where can I find her? She won't talk to you directly, but she teaches self-defense now. East End, behind that old boxing gym. Classes end around 10. She closes up alone. Click. The line went dead. Rain swept through Reveridge that night like a whisper of something it didn't want to say out loud. Elijah pulled his coat tighter as he crossed the cracked sidewalk, the neon hum of Mason Street boxing flickering weakly above the door. A metal shutter was half rolled down. The building looked closed, but a soft light still glowed inside. He pushed the door open. The room smelled of sweat, bleach, and stubbornness. Heavy bags hung from chains. Mats were rolled to the corner. At the far end, a woman in a zip-up hoodie knelt by a row of lockers, stuffing gloves into a duffel. Grace Lormont? Elijah called. She didn't turn around. You're late. Her voice was flat. Not hostile, but far from warm. I wasn't sure you'd be here. I always am. Habit of people who've been followed. She finally stood. Early 42nd, cropped hair, lean build, the kind of frame that had once worn a badge and never stopped looking over its shoulder. Her eyes scanned him like a threat assessment. You were tipped off, she said. Let me guess, anonymous voice, middle of the night. Sounded nervous, but knew too much. He nodded. I don't want names, she said. I want to know why you're standing here with that look in your eye. Elijah reached into his bag and pulled out the file. Camila Reyes. Single mom. Bitten in front of her daughter during a raid that never should have happened. The dog was Shadow. Handler. Jonathan Pierce. He let the silence stretch. I know you tried to stop something, he said. I think they buried what you found. She looked at the file like it had come from a grave. I never had proof, she said quietly. Only shadows. Grace sat on the edge of the ring platform, the duffel bag unopened. Elijah leaned against the ropes across from her. There were complaints, she said. Not just from civilians. Rookie officers, dispatchers, even a vet tech. They said the K-9 training logs were off. Dogs cleared for duty despite failed tests. One name came up again and again. Shadow. She shook her head. But every time I pulled a thread, someone higher up cut it off. Chain of command, they said. Protocol. One day I came in and found my office already packed. Reorganization of personnel. They gave me a nice letter and no forwarding address. She leaned forward, eyes sharp now. You want proof? You won't find it on paper. They shredded anything that breathed doubt. Oh? But you think it exists? Elijah asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. Check the incident from the 11th of June, 2019. Warehouse raid. No civilian injuries. No misconduct recorded. But I got a tip from a paramedic who saw Shadow being treated off record. The dog had blood on his mouth. No matching police injury. Figure that out, and you'll find your crack. Elijah scribbled furiously. What happened to the paramedic? Quit. Moved states. You'll need more than a subpoena to get her talking. A beat. Is it worth it? She asked. He looked up. Camila's daughter hasn't spoken since that night. Grace's face changed barely, but the flicker of pain in her jaw betrayed her. I've met women like Camila, she said softly. I've also met girls like Nina. The system chews them up, then tells them to swallow. She stood. If you keep going down this road, they'll come for your license. Maybe more. Let them, Elijah said. It wasn't bravado, it was tired defiance. She studied him for a moment longer, then walked to the door and turned the lock from inside. Come back tomorrow, she said. Same time. I'll show you something I shouldn't still have. Back in his car, Elijah sat behind the wheel for 10 full minutes without moving. His breath fogged the glass. The streets were empty now. All the lights off in the homes where people trusted systems like the one he was unraveling. He looked down at the file again. Grace's story wasn't just a loose end, it was a matchbook under a dry barn. And it meant one thing. They had known. They had always known. But knowing wasn't the same as believing. And belief, that had a cost. He turned the key in the ignition. The car rolled forward, headlights piercing the mist like quiet declarations. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And this time, Elijah didn't flinch. The hinges of the courtroom door creaked as the handler stepped inside, boot heels clicking against polished linoleum. At his side walked the legend himself, Shadow, even without his badge. The German Shepherd carried presence. His coat gleamed under the cold lights, muscles taut beneath his harness, every paw placed with mechanical precision. A hush fell over the room, the kind reserved for something sacred or something dangerous. Jonathan Pierce didn't walk beside him. It was the defense attorney who brought him in, a tall man with silver at his temples and the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain himself. He offered a polite nod to the judge, then to the jury, as if acknowledging a silent orchestra before raising the baton. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth. With your permission, we'd like to demonstrate the behavioral integrity of the 9-inch question. For the jury's clarity, Ensel, the judge, an older woman who'd seen every trick in the book, tapped her gavel once. Proceed. But this is a court of facts, not theater. The lawyer smiled. Then we shall keep the performance brief. Shadow sat, without command. His gaze didn't scan the crowd. He looked ahead, waiting. A stillness wrapped around him, the kind bred from thousands of drills, endless hours of controlled chaos, of learning not to flinch at flashbangs or run at gunfire. He was, in every sense, the ideal. The lawyer stepped back. Sit. Shadow remained as he was. Unmoving. Perfect. Down. The dog slid into a low crouch, nose between his paws, breathing steady. The jury watched as if hypnotized. Stay. The handler stepped away 5 feet, 10 feet, all the way across the courtroom floor, and the dog didn't stir. A pause. Then, Shadow. Heel. The German Shepherd rose and padded across the space, aligning with the attorney's side with such fluid grace that one juror gasped audibly. The lawyer turned, slowly. Shadow, he said again. Attack. The room tensed. Shadow bolted. A blur of motion. But at the last second, inches before impact, the command rang out. Stop. And he did. Dead still. Front legs braced. Eyes alert. Mouth closed. Not a bark. Not a growl. Just obedience. A performance so calculated, it felt unreal. Like a statue caught mid-breath. Camila sat frozen in her seat, fingers curled into the hem of her skirt. Nina, beside her, watched the floor. Her small hand clutched the ear of the bear tighter, the threadbare fabric nearly torn from months of silent comfort. To them, it wasn't a show. It was a flashback. Shadow, that same Shadow, had leapt through their front door like a bullet that night. No hesitation, no moment of grace, just pain, panic, blood. But here, he was beautiful, reformed, rewritten. And the jury? The jury looked like they believed it. Elijah leaned toward Camila and whispered, They're choreographing trust. She didn't answer. She just kept watching, eyes locked on the dog who had broken her world and now bowed for applause. The lawyer circled back to the jury box, voice rising now with practiced warmth. You see before you, not a beast, not some feral creature unleashed without thought, but a trained, controlled law enforcement asset. Shadow is not capable of random violence. His discipline exceeds that of most humans. He gestured toward the dog. A canine like this doesn't act out of impulse. He acts on command, on threat, on procedure. He paused. And the night in question, ladies and gentlemen, there was reason to act. Elijah's jaw clenched. He glanced down at his notes, the photos, the transcripts, the erased body cam files, and felt the pit in his stomach turn cold. They weren't defending Shadow. They were selling him, like a statue of bronze, polished and posed. And the jury? They were buying. Judge Harlan raised an eyebrow. Is there further demonstration, counselor? The attorney shook his head. Only that the jury has now seen with their own eyes the level of obedience this dog demonstrates under pressure. He turned to Shadow. Place. Shadow moved to the corner mat, laid down for him, and curled into a tight ball, not relaxed, not casual, coiled like a spring hidden beneath fur and bone. He did not wag his tail. He did not close his eyes. He waited, even when forgotten. Outside the courtroom during recess, reporters buzzed. That dog's unreal. You think she lied? No way. A dog that perfect would just snap. Elijah stepped away from the crowd. Grace Lormont was waiting by the courthouse columns, arms folded. They just turned a trauma into a talent show, she said bitterly. I know. He was trained to perform, not to be questioned. You think the jury will buy it? Grace exhaled. Not all of them, but some. They'll remember the commands, the stop, the heel, not the bite. She looked at him. You'd better have more than missing reports, Elijah. You need something that bleeds. Back inside, Camila turned to her daughter. Nina, she whispered. Are you okay? The child blinked, then whispered back, barely audible. He's wearing different eyes. Camila stared. What? Nina clutched her bear tighter. That dog, he's not the same. He looked softer, like a mask. Camila's throat tightened. Some part of her, the part that had learned to survive, wanted to dismiss it as childish confusion. But another part had also seen something different. The stiffness in Shadow's frame. The delay in the first command. The way he never looked at them, not once. As if he knew. The courthouse hallway was unusually quiet for the midday recess. Just the slow, shuffling footsteps of jurors and the muffled rattle of vending machines behind fogged glass. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed with that sterile hum that never quite let the silence settle. But it wasn't silence that haunted Camila, it was what might break it. She sat on a wooden bench against the wall, Nina's small body curled beside her, head resting against her mother's side. The girl hadn't spoken all morning. Not a word. Just held her one-eared teddy and blinked at nothing in particular. Camila stroked her hair absent-mindedly, her other hand still trembling from what they'd witnessed in the courtroom. That display. The crowd had clapped in their heads, if not with their hands. Then, the sound of claws on tile. Click, click, click. Camila's breath caught. The door to the courtroom creaked open, and Shadow stepped through, guided by a deputy holding a leash that might as well have been made of thread. The dog didn't pull. He didn't resist. He moved with ghostly calm, back straight, ears sharp, eyes alert, scanning the corridor, not like a predator, but like a soldier between orders. His gaze swept right past Elijah, past the clerk sorting papers at the end of the hall, and then landed on Nina. He stopped, and so did time. Camila felt her daughter shift. The little body beside her stiffened, not all at once, but in waves. First the back, then the neck, then the hand, that little hand that had been gripping the bear, slowly uncurled. The threadbare toy tumbled from her lap and landed on the floor with a soft flump. Nina sat upright, staring at the dog. Her lips parted, and for the first time since that night, she spoke. Bad dog. 2 words, soft as breath, sharp as glass. Shadow's ears flattened not in aggression, not even in guilt, but in something older, something deeper. He took a step back, then another. The leash went taut, but the handler didn't pull. Didn't need to. Shadow had stopped on his own. The hallway went still. Even the vending machine seemed to fall silent. Nina's arm lifted not to point, not to accuse, but as if to shield herself from something invisible. Not the body of the dog. The memory. The echo. Bad dog, she said again. No scream, no tears, just fact, just truth. Elijah was the first to move. He stepped forward, not toward Nina, but toward the handler. Get him out of here, he said, voice low but cutting. Now. The deputy hesitated. I said now. Shadow turned before commanded. padding away with the quiet speed of something retreating but not running. Camila pulled Nina close. Her daughter buried her face in her side. She could feel the tremble beneath the skin. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet interview room, away from the press, the lawyers, the guards. Just Camila, Nina, and Elijah. The little girl sat on a leather chair that swallowed her small frame, bare in lap again. Camila watched her own body aching with something that felt like awe and dread wrapped in the same cloth. She remembered. She whispered. Elijah nodded, and she said it in front of half the court. Camila blinked at him, not understanding. That wasn't just emotion, he continued. That was a statement. The jury saw it. But she's a child. Yes, he said. That's why it matters. Back in the courtroom, word had already spread. Some called it a fluke. Others called it manipulation. But a few, the ones who'd seen Nina's face, who'd watched that moment through the eyes of their own daughters, their own sons, began to wonder if a child with no voice could carry the weight of memory. What did that say about a system that wouldn't listen? Later that afternoon, when the trial resumed, Elijah returned to the bench beside Camila. Something changed, he said quietly. Camila looked at him. The room, it feels different. He was right. The air was thicker, but not with tension. With attention, focus, the kind that couldn't be bought by obedience demonstrations or flawless commands. It had taken a child to cut through the noise, a girl with a bear and 2 words that reached further than any cross-examination, but not everyone was moved. From the defense table, Jonathan Pierce had not spoken a word during the recess. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He didn't react, didn't nod, didn't blink. But his eyes, those polished soldier's eyes, were no longer fixed on the judge. They were on the child. He'd heard her. And somehow, in that frozen expression, Camila could see it. He was afraid. They didn't even make it to the sidewalk before the cameras found them. The moment the courtroom doors creaked open and Nina stepped into the corridor flanked by Camila and Elijah, a wall of reporters surged like a wave breaking free of its leash. Flashes erupted like silent lightning. Microphones bloomed in every direction. A dozen voices crashed over each other, asking the same thing 100 different ways. Miss Reyes, was that the first time your daughter spoke since the attack? Counselor Moore, do you believe the child's words prove guilt? Is the K-9 under investigation? Nina, can you say again what you saw? Elijah stepped in front of them, shielding the small, fragile silhouette behind his coat. No comment, he said sharply. Respect the child. But it was too late. The moment had already happened. Some reporter had caught it that split second before Nina buried her face in her mother's coat again. The wide eyes, the faint scar on her forehead, the glimpse of the teddy bear with one torn ear. That was the image now. By sunset, it was on every screen in the country. Inside a small waiting room 2 floors above, Camila sat on a couch that smelled like old laminate and floor cleaner. Nina lay across her lap, asleep now, finally worn out by more than just the trial. She'd spoken, and in doing so, she had unshackled something no one could prepare for. Camila traced a finger down her daughter's cheek, brushing away a curl stuck to her skin. There was something sacred in the quiet, and something terrifying. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew it had changed. Elijah stood by the window, looking out at the gray wash of buildings and flashing press vans below. His phone buzzed every few seconds, messages from media, from other attorneys, from someone at the Bar Association telling him to prepare for visibility. He silenced it. Not now. He kept thinking about Shadow. That moment in the hallway, the way the dog had stepped back. Not from command, not from pain, but something deeper. He'd seen dogs fake reactions before. He knew how handlers could script behavior, rehearse obedience like lines in a play. But what he saw, you couldn't rehearse that. You couldn't train a German shepherd to flinch from a child. You couldn't train guilt. Elijah turned away from the window, lowering himself into the chair beside Camila. You okay? He asked softly. Camila looked down at Nina. I don't know what okay feels like anymore. He nodded. You will. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched not from silence, but from the weight of what was not being said. Elijah, she whispered, Is there a chance they'll say she was coached? Yes. Is there a chance they'll call her a liar? He didn't answer, because they already had. That night, the news anchors said the words carefully, like dancers stepping through broken glass. One expert says, children can misattribute fear responses. Could this be a case of suggestive memory? But is it possible the dog simply reacted to a scent? They showed a loop of Shadow walking in court. Ears forward, calm, precise. Then spliced it with Nina's whisper, "Bad dog." Again and again. The networks called it the gaze heard around the court. Commentators debated canine memory on live television. Some praised the dog's discipline. Others questioned how such a trained animal could be capable of unprovoked attack. No one mentioned what Elijah had read 3 years ago, buried in an internal memo. Canines exhibit emotional memory, recall strongest under stress, or in close proximity to triggering individuals. It wasn't about sight. It was about scent, context, emotion. Dogs remembered, especially the ones who had done something they weren't supposed to. In the dark of her apartment, Camila couldn't sleep. Nina was curled up in bed, clutching her bear again, but this time, without the trembling. There was a stillness to her sleep. Not peace, not yet, but the first breath after drowning. Camila stood by the window, watching nothing, her arms wrapped around her own ribs like a shield. On the television, muted now, was a panel arguing about guilt, about Pierce, about whether a dog's reaction meant anything at all. But Camila remembered something else. That night as Shadow stood over her, lips pulled back, blood staining his teeth. Something in his eyes had flickered. A hesitation. A moment too long. And she remembered thinking, he knows what he's doing. It wasn't instinct. It was choice. She closed her eyes, letting the memory come. The scream, the lunge, the sharp crack of a bone, or maybe a rib. And then footsteps. Not police boots. Bare feet. Small. Running toward her through the chaos. Nina, a whisper in her own voice now, echoing from memory. "Don't move, baby. Don't move." She exhaled sharply, jaw tight. They would try to make her doubt it, make her second-guess her own fear, but the truth didn't need a uniform. And it didn't need permission to be spoken by a child. The next morning, Elijah sat at his desk with a legal pad nearly shredded at the edges from constant rewriting. The defense would come after Nina's credibility. He knew it. They'd bring in pediatric psychologists, maybe even use her silence as a weapon. But Elijah wasn't worried about that anymore, because something had shifted in the public. People weren't asking if Camila was lying. They were asking why a town would rather believe a badge than a child. And in another room across town, Jonathan Pierce stared at the same clip, over and over. Nina, saying the words, Shadow, backing away. He didn't blink, didn't speak. But somewhere deep behind his veteran stillness, a fault line had begun to crack. Because no matter how many drills he'd run, no matter how many medals on the shelf, there was one thing he had never trained Shadow to do. Flinch from a child. And Shadow had remembered. Because guilt isn't a command you can unteach. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush when the bailiff opened the door. She walked in quietly, no fanfare, no eye contact, no makeup to hide the fatigue in her face. Grace Lormont, former Internal Affairs, 37, fired without explanation 2 years ago. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too big, the kind you keep at the back of your closet in case life forces you to testify against people you once called family. Her hair was pulled back, not out of vanity, but necessity. In her hand, a folder wrapped in a rubber band, thick with time. Elijah rose slowly. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Grace Lormont to the stand. Across the aisle, Pierce didn't move. Shadow, lying at his feet, only blinked. She sat stiffly on the witness stand, back straight, like someone trained to follow protocol even after protocol broke her. Miss Lormont, Elijah began gently, can you tell the court your previous position? Internal Affairs Investigator, Eden Ridge Police Department, 6 years. And your reason for leaving? She paused. One breath. Then, I was asked to stop asking questions. A murmur rolled through the gallery. The judge tapped her gavel once enough to keep order, not enough to silence truth. Elijah stepped closer, voice low. You were in charge of investigating officer conduct? Yes. Did that include canine units? Yes. Specifically, Officer Jonathan Pierce and Shadow? She nodded. Dozens of reports passed through my desk. I flagged 6. All were closed without full review. He handed her a copy of a form. This one, dated the 12th of March, 2021. Can you explain what this is? She studied it. Civilian complaint? Woman bitten in a traffic stop. Claimed the dog lunged before any command. Required surgery to her left arm. And what was the department's conclusion? Lormont's jaw tightened. The report was amended after submission. Officer said the dog was responding to a threat. No body cam was submitted, and the civilian declined to press charges after a settlement. You attempted to reopen the file? She nodded again. I was denied. Pierce still hadn't looked up. He sat motionless at the defense table, Shadow beside him like a statue of loyalty sculpted in gilt. But his right hand tightened slightly into a fist. The jury noticed. Miss Lormont, Elijah continued, softer now. How many other instances did you observe with similar outcomes? Grace's eyes flicked toward Nina. The child sat next to Camila, smaller than the chair she occupied. Her one-eared bear perched on her knees like a silent protector. 4, Grace said finally. 4 victims, 4 settlements, all closed before escalation. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Her voice broke slightly. I tried, but when you're the one with the flashlight in a room full of locked doors, they make sure yours is the first they close. She lifted the folder. I brought copies of my flagged cases. Originals are gone from the system. Elijah reached out, took the file like someone receiving the last candle in a power outage. Across the room, the prosecutor whispered something to a paralegal. Phones were already buzzing in their laps, media alerts, statement drafts, optics preparation. Because this wasn't just testimony. It was a match lit. Near, dry, leaves. You said one victim required surgery, Elijah asked. Did you speak to her? Yes. What did she say? Grace looked down at her hands. She said the dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It just came at her like it had already decided, like it had done it before. Pierce finally blinked. Just once. Not at Grace. Not at Elijah. But at the floor. At the dog. Shadow. As if wondering for the first time if he'd ever really known the animal beside him. Judge Halpern leaned forward. Miss Lormont, were you terminated for cause? No, Your Honor. No disciplinary action. No misconduct. Just silence. Thank you. You may step down. Grace gathered her file again. She didn't look at Pierce as she passed. She didn't need to. Some things speak louder when you don't speak at all. Outside, reporters swarmed like blood in water. Elijah stood by the courthouse steps, flanked by microphones again. But this time he held the file in both hands like a weapon. Today was not about headlines, he said. It was about history, the kind this town has buried for too long. Grace Lormont did not testify out of revenge. She did it because truth has no expiration date. And inside, Camila watched from a side room with Nina asleep again in her arms. Shadow's name was now trending, but not the way it once did. Not with medals, with questions. Back in the kennel where Shadow was temporarily kept between trial sessions, an officer reached in to feed him. The dog took the food politely, quiet, ears half back, watching the man with those amber eyes that had once been described in articles as noble. But the officer hesitated before latching the gate, because for the first time, he didn't trust the dog. And he didn't know why. The manila folder sat between them on the table like something radioactive. It was night again. One of those heavy, breathless nights where even the street lamps seemed reluctant to shine. Elijah sat across from Grace in the corner booth of a diner that never turned its music above a whisper. A cracked jukebox played something old and instrumental. A waitress poured coffee without asking. No one made eye contact for too long. He signed it last year, Grace said quietly, sliding the folder toward Elijah. Then called me the next morning and begged me to burn it. Elijah opened it carefully. The affidavit inside was handwritten. Neat. Nervous. Every line pressed hard into the paper, like someone trying to make sure the truth wouldn't fade. Devon March, age, 34, warehouse employee, no record, no voice, until now. Grace's voice lowered. He was walking home from a bar. Not drunk, just late. Shadow was on patrol with Pierce that night. Devin passed by an alley. Heard yelling. Didn't even get a full sentence out before Shadow took him down. Elijah kept reading. I did not resist. I did not speak with aggression. The dog clamped my leg before I even saw the officer. He paused at the next line. The bite went to the bone. I had to get a metal pin in my ankle. There was a hospital record attached, and an image grainy, taken with a flip phone. A swollen leg, torn denim soaked through. How much? Elijah asked. $15,000, Grace replied. Paid through an intermediary. Signed NDA. No formal complaint filed. Everything disappeared in under 2 weeks. Elijah looked up. Why is he coming forward now? Grace sipped her cold coffee. Her hands trembled once, then still, because he saw Nina on the news. Later that week, Elijah drove alone down a narrow road lined with shuttered factories and gravel shoulders. He parked in front of a one-story house where the porch light flickered like a nervous heartbeat. Devin March answered the door without a word. His limp was noticeable. So was the scar along his right shin, faint but unmistakable in the porch light. Mr. March, Elijah said gently, holding up his ID. You don't have to do this, but I want you to know what you say now could help a little girl sleep through the night again. Devin stepped aside. His living room smelled of machine oil and old carpet. A ceiling fan clicked overhead like a clock ticking towards something he hadn't yet decided. I watched that clip 10 times, Devin said as they sat. The girl, the bear, the way the dog backed off. He exhaled. That wasn't just obedience. That was memory. Elijah leaned forward. Why didn't you speak up sooner? Devin didn't answer immediately. He reached down and pulled something from under the coffee table, an envelope. Opened. Inside, a single business card. No name, no number. Just a blue police shield embossed in silver. They left this the day after I asked the department for a copy of my report, he said. Didn't say a word. Just taped it to my door. He met Elijah's eyes. I'm not stupid. I know a warning when I see one. But fear, Elijah thought, doesn't last forever. Not when the lie gets heavier than the silence. Will you testify? Devin hesitated, looked down at his leg, then at the television, muted in the corner, showing a replay of Grace's testimony on local news. He nodded once. Yeah, he said. It's time someone said what really happened. The next morning, in court, Elijah stood before the judge holding a newly notarized affidavit. This, he said, is the testimony of Devin March, a man who was silenced with money, who carries the scars not just on his body, but in the way he crosses the street every time he sees a patrol car. He handed it to the clerk. On the defense bench, Pierce stared straight ahead. Shadow didn't move. Camila sat near the back that day, holding Nina's hand. The little girl's face was blank, but her fingers gripped tighter than usual. Outside, whispers spread again. Another victim, more buried files, and suddenly, the weight shifted. The town that once stood behind its badge began, slowly, to ask, what else have we swallowed in the name of order? Elijah met Grace in the hallway after court. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Better than I've felt in 2 years. He looked down at the folder still in her hands. How many more of these? Grace's eyes were tired, but something in her posture had changed. A looseness, a bit of peace, even in the storm. Maybe just one, she said. Maybe a dozen. And then more quietly, but now they'll stop burning. That night, Elijah called Devin. Thank you, he said. You didn't just speak for yourself. Devin was silent for a while. Then, tell her, the little girl. Tell her not all dogs are bad. Some just belong to the wrong man. Elijah closed his eyes. I will. The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Not tense, just quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention but holds it anyway. The kind that sinks into the grain of the wood and the fabric of the seats. The kind that precedes a truth people aren't ready to hear. Elijah Moore stood at the center, no notes in hand, just memory, just resolve. He looked at the jury, 6 men, 6 women, 3 of whom had once clapped for Jonathan Pierce at a 4th of July parade. He knew. He'd done his research. But something in their eyes had changed since Nina's voice cracked the air. He took a breath. I want to start today with a simple truth, he said. Dogs do not operate on their own inside a police system, especially not dogs like Shadow. Soak. He turned toward the projection screen, where a paused frame from a body cam replayed silently behind him. Shadow mid-lunge, teeth bared, inches from Devon March's ankle. This, Elijah continued, pointing gently, was not instinct, it was command. He paused, letting the frame hang. You've seen Shadow in this courtroom. Impeccably trained. Perfect posture. Response to voice, hand, scent. Everything designed to minimize risk and maximize control. So ask yourself, does a dog like that lunge unless ordered to? He stepped forward, voice calm but firm. Devon March was never a threat. Neither was Camila Rivera. And God knows, neither was Nina. A beat. 4 years old, silent for months. Until that moment when a decorated police dog walked past her and she said 2 words. He let them hang in the air. Beto. Elijah walked slowly now, letting the weight shift. We've heard the defense say this was a misunderstanding, that Shadow was reacting to perceived threat. But dogs like Shadow don't act on guesswork. They act on cue. They act on routine. And they act on what they've been allowed to get away with. He stopped in front of the jury. Multiple cases. All swept away. Body cam footage deleted. Victims paid off or scared into silence. Reports backdated, rewritten, buried. He picked up a copy of Devon March's affidavit and held it in his hand like something sacred. This man, Elijah said, was bit so deeply he couldn't walk for weeks. He was never charged, never arrested, just told to sign a paper and forget. A murmur passed through the courtroom, quickly hushed. But he didn't forget, and neither did Nina. On the defense bench, Pierce stared ahead, his jaw tight. His hands didn't move, not even to touch the leash curled beside him. Shadow lay at his feet, unmoving, unreadable. Now, I don't believe Shadow was evil, Elijah continued softly. He's a dog. He did what he was trained to do, what he was told to do. He turned, eyes meeting every juror. But that's the point, isn't it? The judge leaned forward slightly. Mr. Moore, she said, you're approaching argument. Be mindful. Elijah nodded respectfully, but his voice remained steady. I understand, Your Honor. I'm simply establishing a pattern. He turned back to the screen, now split into images. Devon's leg, Grace's memos, the outline of Camila's injuries, the child's bear, held against a courtroom chest like a shield made of cloth. And one more image. A freeze. Frame of Nina's face right as she whispered those words. Her lips barely parted, her eyes staring into something too large to name. This child, Elijah said quietly, has no agenda, no vendetta. She didn't rehearse. She didn't perform. She remembered. He let the silence return, but not linger too long. That moment, he said, wasn't about a dog gone rogue. It was about a system that allowed a man to wield his authority unchecked and to let an animal become an extension of that unchecked power. He stepped back toward the jury box, lowered his voice just a little. You've seen the videos. You've read the statements. You've looked into that dog's eyes. Now ask yourselves, what kind of command breaks the trust between a child and a creature meant to protect? He glanced once more at the defense table. Shadow is not on trial. But what he did, what he was ordered to do, is the mirror we must all look into. He returned to his table and sat beside Camila, who gripped the edge of her scarf with both hands. Nina sat beside her with her head on her mother's arm, the teddy bear limp in her lap, the ear even more frayed now than when she first walked into the courtroom. On the opposite side, Pierce shifted, just slightly. He reached out to place his hand on Shadow's collar, but the dog rose before he could touch him. Not aggressive, just alert. Almost as if he knew something had shifted. The line had been drawn, and this time, someone had dared to cross it. The courtroom lights felt harsher that morning, though no bulbs had been changed. Devon March stood near the witness stand like a man still deciding if he should sit. His shoulders were hunched, jaw tight, hands worrying a folded paper towel he'd brought in instead of a handkerchief. It was already damp. Elijah nodded to him gently, a quiet encouragement. Mr. March, he said, voice even. You may begin when you're ready. Devon's eyes flicked across the room, not toward Pierce, not toward Shadow lying like a statue near the defense table, but toward the far side of the courtroom where Camila sat with Nina. The child clutched her bear again, One ear nearly gone. Her eyes unreadable. Something in that small face steadied him. He took the oath with a trembling hand. I'm not used to speaking in front of people," he said, voice low and rough. "I drive for a moving company. Been quiet most my life." No one interrupted. No one coughed. "I didn't think I'd ever end up here. But I guess you can only forget something for so long before it starts scratching at the back of your head every night." Elijah took a step forward. "Devin, would you tell us what happened on the 17th of June 3 years ago?" Devin nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I was walking home from a friend's house," he began. "Didn't drive that night. Left the truck behind because I'd had a drink. One. Just one. Figured it was safer to walk." He paused. "Didn't make it 2 blocks before the sirens lit up behind me." He rubbed his hands against the knees of his pants, though he was standing. "I didn't run. I stopped. Hands up. I even said, 'I'm not doing anything.' But he shouted something I couldn't hear. Then I saw the dog." He turned slightly, eyes skimming past the jury. "It was like being hit by a truck. I didn't even fall right away. Just felt my leg tear like it wasn't mine anymore." He reached down instinctively to his thigh, as if the memory still throbbed under denim. "No warning. No command that I heard. Just that sound like a growl right in my bones." He looked toward Shadow for the first time. The dog didn't react, didn't blink, just stared straight ahead. "Do you remember who gave the order?" Elijah asked. Devin's jaw flexed. "Officer Pierce. Same voice that yelled when I was already on the ground." "And what happened next?" "They handcuffed me," he said simply. "Left the dog clamped on for another few seconds before someone called it off. I was bleeding bad. My jeans were soaked, but I was still just in shock." He swallowed again. "They didn't charge me. Didn't tell me why I was stopped. At the station, some lieutenant told me I could file a complaint, but it wouldn't go anywhere." Devin's voice had changed. Not louder, but steadier. 2 weeks later, I got a knock on my door. A man in a city car handed me a non-disclosure agreement and a check. Said it was an apology for misunderstanding. Told me it was best to move on. Elijah held up the affidavit. "This was the document?" Devin nodded. "I signed. I needed the money. My knee needed surgery. I still limp in the cold." He looked down, ashamed, then up again. "But I never forgot. And when I saw that little girl on the news, I heard my own breath catch in her silence." The courtroom held its breath. Even the bailiff, stiff as marble most days, had turned his head slightly toward the witness. Elijah walked slowly toward the jury box. "Mr. March," he said, "why are you speaking now?" Devin exhaled shakily. "Because I saw her point at that dog, and I remembered how I couldn't even point at a doorbell after what happened to me. I'd walk around the block just to avoid police stations. You think you're a man until you flinch every time you hear keys on a belt." A slight tremor passed through his hand. He steadied it on the railing, and I realized silence didn't protect me. It just protected them. Across the aisle, Pierce's lawyer scribbled something down, lips a thin line. Pierce sat unnaturally still, but Shadow's ears had perked just slightly, as if recognizing a tone, not a word. The judge looked down but didn't stop the moment. Elijah asked one final question. "If you could say one thing to the jury, one thing only, what would it be?" Devin blinked. And then, for the first time, his voice came without hesitation. "I didn't fight," he said. "I was bitten, and they paid me to forget, but I never did. And if they believe that little girl, then they gotta believe me too." The silence afterward was full, not empty. It had shape. It had grief. It had something like reckoning in its bones. Devin stepped down without looking back. Camila rose instinctively as he passed. She touched his arm just once. Not a thank you, just understanding. Devin nodded at her, then bent slowly to Nina's eye level. The girl didn't say a word, but her hand reached out hesitant, small, and brushed the side of his jeans, right over the scar that still burned beneath the fabric. Then she pulled her hand back and held tighter to her bear. Morning rain drifted across Reveridge like thin smoke, softening the sirens and muting the rush-hour horns. Inside the courthouse, the marble foyer smelled of damp coats and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. Reporters clustered near the metal detectors, murmuring as though the building itself might hush them for speaking too loud. But the name that threaded through every whisper belonged to a 4-year-old who was not there. Nina Reyes, little girl with the bear. Bad dog, remember? The phrase moved from mouth to mouth, no louder than breath, yet impossible to ignore. Even the deputies at the elevator seemed to pause when it floated past, as if those two words had become a password to some deeper truth. Elijah Moore stepped out of the elevator and into the corridor outside courtroom 3B. His briefcase felt heavier than usual, but it wasn't the paperwork. It was the weight of momentum, something fragile and new, the sense that the scales had just begun to tip. Nina was at home with a neighbor today, wrapped in blankets and cartoons. Camila had insisted, one day of quiet for her daughter, one day without bright lights and strangers' cameras. Elijah understood. A courtroom could grind the spirit even when it tried to nurse justice. Yet her absence created a strange energy. Jurors arrived scanning the benches, almost expectant, as though they might see the small figure with the frayed teddy once more. When they realized she was not there, they seemed unsettled, like listeners waiting for a familiar refrain that never came. Inside, the wood-paneled room filled slowly. Devon March's testimony still lingered in the grain of the desks, in the crack of the judge's gavel, in the hurt silence that followed his words. I never forgot. A court reporter adjusted her headset. Her eyes, normally focused only on the stenograph, kept darting toward the jury box. One or two jurors spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward the defense table where Jonathan Pierce sat rigid, his fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles blanched. Shadow rested at his feet, head up, ears alert, the leash coiled, like a question no one wanted to ask. Across the aisle, Camila took her seat alone for the first time since the trial began. She folded Nina's tiny denim jacket across her lap, the sleeves still rolled. The quiet in her eyes was different today, less raw, more determined, as though her daughter's two soft syllables had become armor she could finally slip into place. Elijah joined her, lowering himself into the chair with a small nod. How's she doing? Dreaming of a dog that listens? Camila answered. Her voice wavered, then steadied. I told her sometimes you have to speak once, and the world keeps hearing it. Elijah managed a thin smile. The world is listening, Camila. I can feel it. The bailiff's call, all rise, rang out like a bell in a church that suddenly mattered again. Judge Harmon entered, robes swishing softly. She glanced over the room, her gaze lingering an extra heartbeat on Camila's empty side. Then she faced the jury. Counsel, she said, please approach. A quick, low conference, parchment-thin sheets of procedural talk, but even from the gallery the shift was obvious. Elijah returned to the plaintiff's table with the faintest spark in his eyes. What is it? Camila whispered. They filed a motion for continuance, he murmured. Defense says they need time to review new materials in light of yesterday's revelations. Translation? Pierce's rattled. Across the well, Denning smoothed his tie again and again, a tic that had grown worse with every witness. He leaned toward Pierce, voice a hiss lost beneath courtroom hum. Pierce shook his head once, jaw clamped. Shadow's tail thumped the floor once, then stilled. Testimony resumed, but the cadence had changed. A forensic accountant detailed stipend irregularities in K-9 training funds. An officer from another precinct spoke about standard bite-hold durations and how shadows were consistently beyond protocol. Facts, figures, policies, each landed dully, yet beneath them Elijah sensed an undercurrent. The jury no longer weighed each point in isolation. They measured everything against the echo of a child's two words. During a mid-morning recess, Elijah stepped into the hallway. Reporters surged, recorders blinking red, but he raised a hand. No statements, he said. Let the evidence speak. One journalist called after him. Counselor, do you believe the girl's testimony is the turning point? Elijah paused. He pictured Nina on the hallway bench, her arm lifting like a sapling in stormlight. I think truth chooses its own voice, he said. Ours is simply to listen. End. Back inside, the next witness faltered under cross-examination. But the damage to Pierce's image was done. Jurors scribbled notes furiously when charts displayed settlement payouts. Camila watched, gripping Nina's jacket tighter each time a figure appeared on the screen. Somewhere near the back, a lone court-appointed therapist there to observe, in case Pierce's defense tried to rebut with trauma theories, whispered to a colleague, silence can be louder than screams. The colleague nodded, eyes never leaving the jury. By day's end, the rain had stopped. Sunlight knifed through high windows, dust motes swirling like confetti no one dared release. Judge Harmon adjourned until morning. The gavel's tap felt softer, almost thoughtful. The courtroom stood, but for a moment no one moved, as though a collective breath was being held and no one wanted to be the first to let it go. Camila inhaled and exhaled slowly. She rose, smoothing Nina's jacket. Elijah offered an arm. She declined with a tired smile. Together they walked the aisle, footsteps echoing off walls that had heard too much and still demanded more. In the corridor, conversations hushed as they passed, not out of scorn, out of something closer to respect. Camila felt it brush her shoulders like a cloak she hadn't asked for. At the elevator, Elijah turned to her. "Tomorrow we bring the technician who audited the body cam servers," he said. "Numbers can't feel, but they can testify." She nodded. "And I'll bring Nina's bear," she added quietly. "He deserves to see the finish line." Elijah almost laughed, the first genuine laugh in weeks. "I think we all do." That night, headlines would speak of financial discrepancies, missing footage, and a town re-examining its heroes. Analysts would debate whether a dog could carry guilt, whether a child could carry justice. But in the courthouse corridors, only one thing mattered. The tide had turned, and everyone, judge, jurors, lawyers, onlookers, felt the current shift beneath their feet, pulling them toward a reckoning spoken first by a voice so small it nearly slipped through the cracks of power. A voice still echoing, even in her absence. The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse blinds, carving thin bars of light across the defense table. Jonathan Pierce sat inside those bars like a man already counting the hours of confinement. His suit jacket, flawless at the trial's start, now bunched at the shoulders. 2 buttons were undone at the cuff. He kept fastening and unfastening them, as if a perfect seam might hold the day together. Carl Denning slid into the chair beside him, face flushed. The gallery was emptying for the brief recess, but reporters loitered near the exit, hungry for one last telltale photograph. Denning leaned close, voice just above a whisper. "Listen to me. If we let this go to verdict, you are staring at assault with intent, civil liability, maybe perjury once they subpoena the scrubbed server logs. Prison, John. I'm not talking suspension. I'm talking bars." Pierce's jaw flexed, eyes fixed on the judge's empty bench. "Then fix it." Denning's fingers drummed the table. "There's still a window plead to negligent handling, state time, no felony. You'll lose the badge, but you keep your pension." Pierce didn't blink. "I earned that badge." "No," Denning hissed. "You borrowed it. The department owns your shine, remember? They won't bleed for you once the jury deliberates. They'll cut you loose faster than an old radio." Pierce's mouth twisted into something sour. "So, lie better." Denning recoiled as if slapped. "You think I haven't bled every trick dry?" The girl cracked the jury. Devon March drove the wedge deeper. "Lormont's files? They're nails in the coffin." He lowered his voice further. "And your dog reacted in front of every camera in the state. Shadow backed away from a child. No handler script can erase that." Pierce's hands tightened until the tendons stood out like cables. Shadow was tired. Shadow remembered. Denning shot back. And so did everyone in that box. He jerked his chin toward the jurors, filing out single file. Heads down, murmurs hushed. "They're not weighing evidence anymore, they're counting sins." Pierce breathed through his nose, a sharp, rasping sound. "I saved this town. 20 kilos off the streets. 3 gang busts. I bled for them." "And they printed your picture," Denning said, softer now. "But a medal's only shiny as long as no one flips it over." For the first time, Pierce looked at his lawyer. The bravado in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a kind of dull bewilderment, as if the walls had moved overnight, and he alone hadn't noticed. "What if we put Shadow back on the stand?" Pierce muttered. "Run a scenario. Show the bite sleeve." Denning's laugh was short and joyless. "You'll only prove the dog bites when told. And the prosecution will ask one question. Who gave the order?" Silence swallowed them. Across the aisle, Elijah Moore conferred with Camila. Voices low, posture calm. They didn't need to press. Gravity now worked for them. Denning rubbed his temples. "Look, John, I can still call a character witness, maybe the police chief. We paint you as overworked, misled by bad intel, remorseful." "I'm not remorseful," Pierce snapped, louder than intended. A reporter's head rose near the door. Denning shot him a glare, lowered his tone again. "Then pretend. Because this case is no longer about tactical nuance. It's about a child who said 2 words and toppled a statue. Ugh. Pierce swallowed. His gaze drifted to Shadow, lying sphinx-like by the bench. The dog's ears flicked back, tail twitching once an unconscious mirror of his handler's agitation. For a heartbeat, Pierce's features softened, sadness threading through the steel. Then it was gone, replaced by the brittle mask of command. "Do you still have contacts in the press?" Pierce asked. Denning's eyebrows lifted. "To what end?" "Leak that Nina was rehearsed. Say Elijah coached the line." Denning exhaled, a slow, incredulous sigh. A last-minute smear? That only hardens sympathy. Jurors hate bullies, John. Pierce stared past him, eyes unfocused. "I won't die in a cell." Denning leaned in. "Then take the plea." A door at the rear swung open. The bailiff stepped in. 5 minutes, gentlemen." Denning rose. "I'm meeting the ADA in the conference room. If I can salvage a misdemeanor, you say yes, understand?" Pierce didn't answer. Denning hurried off. Papers clutched like a lifeline. Left alone, Pierce sat rigid. His breath fogged once in the strip of light. He reached down, fingers brushing Shadow's head. The dog looked up, eyes amber and unblinking. For years, those eyes had reflected Pierce's certainty back at him. Now they reflected nothing. Pierce's whisper barely stirred the air. "Good dog." Shadow didn't wag his tail. Denning caught the assistant district attorney just outside the conference room. She folded her arms, expression cool. "Change of heart?" "I have authority to discuss reduced charges," Denning said quickly. "Too late," she replied. "We like our odds. Jury's leaning hard." Offer closed. Her heels clicked away, leaving Denning staring at the polished floor where his own reflection seemed to crack. The judge took her seat. The jury filed in, faces neutral but eyes weary. Denning's voice, when he rose for a procedural motion, sounded thin paper on edge of a flame. The motion was denied. Pierce watched it unfold, heartbeat drumming in his ears. This is slipping. He reached for a pen, found none. His palms were damp. Moments later, as testimony resumed, Denning leaned to whisper the news, no plea, no mercy forthcoming. Pierce's posture sagged by a single, damning inch. Across the room, Elijah noted it. So did 2 jurors in the front row. So did Grace Lormont seated behind Camila, her file now only a prop for solidarity. It was the inch that signaled collapse, the first buckle in steel before the bridge gives way. The day ended with clouds sliding over the courthouse dome like slow bruises. Denning exited alone, reporters asking whether the defense planned to rest soon. He offered no comment, only a look of someone who'd watched the ground erode beneath his client's feet. Inside, Pierce remained at the table long after court adjourned, Shadow's leash coiled in his trembling fist. No commands left to give. No scripted obedience to save him. For the first time, he understood. The line between a dog and a command is the man who speaks. And his voice, once iron, was cracking. The jurors were already seated when Jonathan Pierce entered, no leash, no uniform, just a suit that didn't quite fit him anymore. He walked as if the air resisted each step. Camila sat in the gallery, Nina's absence pressing beside her like weight. Pierce raised his right hand for the oath. His voice cracked. "I do." Elijah Moore, calm and focused, approached. "State your name." "Jonathan Pierce." "Occupation?" "Suspended officer, K-9 unit." "How many commendations?" "9. "Where's your badge now?" "In evidence lockup." "Which means today you are not Officer Pierce, just Jonathan Pierce. No badge, no dog, just your word." The silence swelled. "Your body cam during the Reyes raid?" "It malfunctioned." "No footage?" "Number?" "And the deployment log?" "Filled out when?" 2 hours after." "Protocol says 30 minutes, correct?" "Yes." "Did you alter any facts?" "I wrote what I thought was necessary." "Shadow only obeys you, right?" "Yes." "Would he attack without command?" "Only under extreme threat." "Was Miss Reyes armed?" "Number?" "Was she resisting?" "She moved suddenly." Elijah's voice gentled. "When the child said, 'Bad dog,' Shadow backed off. Did you command that retreat?" "Number." "So the dog recognized the child before you did." Pierce's shoulders dropped. The courtroom seemed to lean forward. Elijah finished quietly. What did you remember when you wrote that report? Pierce didn't answer. The silence said enough. As Denning rose for redirect, Pierce lifted his hand. I'd like to add to my testimony. Judge Harmon nodded slowly. Proceed carefully. Pierce looked to the jury. I've carried that badge for 14 years. It gave me authority, and I let it eclipse my humanity. He paused. On the 18th of November, I gave the command. Miss Reyes wasn't armed, but I saw a target, not a mother. And Shadow obeyed. He confessed to disabling his body camera, falsifying timestamps, omitting critical details. I'd done it before. I just didn't want review breathing down my neck. Judge Harmon's tone turned grave. Are you admitting to disabling your camera intentionally? Yes, Your Honor. Elijah stood. Why confess now? Pierce's voice broke. Because a 4-year-old told the truth in 2 words, and my dog he knew before I did. If he can remember, I can't forget. Gasps flickered through the room. One juror wiped a tear. Another clenched his jaw. Elijah pressed. Did anyone instruct you to falsify reports? Number. But silence from above became permission. Then Elijah asked, gently, what would you say to Miss Reyes? Pierce turned to Camila. His voice trembled. I failed you. I chose authority over humanity. I hurt your child's belief in safety. That's not police work. That's abuse. Camila gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Judge Harmon leaned forward. Let the record reflect. The defendant admits to ordering the canine attack and falsifying documents. Her voice was low, weighted. Court is recessed until 9 a.m. tomorrow for plea consideration. As deputies escorted him past Camila's row, Pierce paused, searching for words, but said none. Outside, rain began to fall. At home, Nina sat watching the footage. The clip replayed Pierce's words. I saw a target. Nina turned, voice soft but certain. He knows now. Camila collapsed onto the couch. Tears poured freely, weeks of bracing undone by a single, undeniable truth. Nina came over and hugged her without a word. After a long silence, Camila whispered, Mommy's okay. I know. Nina handed her the frayed teddy bear like a shield of comfort. In that small apartment, mother and daughter finally shared a silence that felt full, not hollow. In the police annex, Shadow lay on a thin blanket. He hadn't moved much in days. A bowl of kibble sat untouched. No familiar footsteps, no commands. A sergeant knelt by his cage. Still nothing? He eats only when no one's watching, the text said. The sergeant scribbled, behavioral withdrawal. Shadow didn't flinch. His eyes weren't scared. They simply waited for something that might never come again. That night, Camila tucked Nina into bed. Are we safe now? Nina asked. Camila brushed a curl from her forehead. We're safer. There's still work to do, but yes, safer. The dog won't hurt people anymore? Number he won't. Nina's eyelids drooped, just before sleep. He knows now. Like a lullaby. Camila returned to the living room. On the news, the city announced a full review of canine practices. Internal Affairs reopened past cases. Each headline stitched a wound a little tighter. She turned off the television just as footage of Shadow flashed across the screen. Once a hero, now an uncertainty. Camila didn't feel anger, just a worn-out empathy for a dog shaped by command, for a man who confused power with purpose, for herself, learning softness again. The room fell quiet except for the drip of rain and Nina's breath from the hallway. Camila leaned back, eyes closed. For the first time since the night her door splintered open, she let the hush stay. She let it mean something. Outside, a sliver of moonlight touched the rug, the teddy bear's stitched face, the books she'd left open beside a forgotten nursing exam. And for the first time, grief and hope shared the same room. By dawn, the front steps of Reveridge Police Headquarters looked like a siege. News vans packed tight, reporters rehearsing live spots in the cold spring air, yellow tulips trampled under tripods. At 8, 0 Ampere. M. Sharp. Chief Lenora Paxton stepped through the oak doors, flanked by 2 captains. Effective immediately, she began, voice clipped. We are initiating an independent review of all K-9 deployments and high-risk raids over the past 5 years. An external panel will have full access to files and disciplinary records. The murmurs began furious. Typing, camera clicks, gasps. Furthermore, Officer Jonathan Pierce has been arrested on charges of aggravated assault, falsifying documents, and obstruction of justice. He was taken into custody at 6:45 with no incident. Flashbulbs strobed. Protesters behind barricades shouted, "Justice for Camila!" The chief's eyes flicked to the crowd just once. A crack in her composure. The department's duty is to protect, not harm. Where we failed, we will own that failure. Inside, Pierce sat cuffed in an interview room, staring at a dried coffee ring. His badge now lay in an evidence bag across the hall. When the detective reading his rights left, Pierce exhaled slow, shaken. Outside, chants filtered through. "Protect! Don't attack!" On Main Street, shops opened to a storm of mixed emotion. Someone chalked "No more shadows" on the asphalt. The bakery that once displayed "We stand with Officer Pierce" signs now taped brown paper over the windows. Radio call-ins began. An elderly woman cried, "My grandson walks that street." A retired officer followed. "Not every cop lies, but every good one should have spoken up." By noon, national outlets shared side-by-side images. Camila hugging her daughter, Shadow cowering, Pierce in handcuffs. Hashtags surged. Number badge on trial, number bark of truth. Inside city chambers, council members debated whether to disband the K-9 unit altogether. Councilman Vega, who once praised Pierce's unblemished courage, now muttered, "The revelations are disturbing." Meanwhile, Camila sat on the couch, phone buzzing nonstop. Nina stacked coloring books in neat piles, occasionally glancing at the muted screen, replaying Paxton's statement. A knock. Grace Lormont stood in the doorway, raincoat dripping. "A vigil's forming," she said gently. Camila hesitated, then declined. Grace left a lavender candle on the counter and exited in silence. At headquarters, files were boxed and carried down halls, stripped of certainty. Some officers whispered. Others removed their badges. In the kennel, Shadow lay still. A dish of shredded chicken and rice went mostly untouched. The supervisor sat across from him and whispered, "We both followed bad orders, buddy." Shadow's tail thumped once, then stilled. As dusk fell, candlelight bloomed across Cedar Park. Families gathered. Camila arrived holding Nina's hand. Elijah, Grace, and Devon joined. When the crowd sang "This Little Light of Mine," Nina hummed a sound soft but full, her first song since the raid. Across town, Pierce sat behind reinforced glass, fluorescent lights humming like static. For once, no command, no badge, no bark answered back. The auxiliary K-9 wing lay silent. Fluorescence flickered overhead. Where handlers once barked orders, now there was only quiet. Shadow lay in the last kennel, paws crossed, unmoving. His coat, once parade-ready, dulled from disuse. He didn't eat, didn't bark, just listened, waiting. Officer Marisol Hanley moved down the aisle, swapping dinner bowls. At each kennel, dogs responded except Shadow. He didn't rise when she crouched by his gate. He only watched. "You should eat," she said gently, sliding in a bowl of chicken and rice. No response. Marisol had seen dogs grieve, but this was different. Shadow wasn't mourning a fallen handler. Pierce was alive 2 floors up, awaiting arraignment. What Shadow had lost wasn't a person. It was purpose. "You remember," she whispered. "That's what people don't get. You remember." She reached her hand through the bars. Shadow leaned forward just enough to touch his nose to her skin, then settled back. Later, Sergeant Clay walked past with a clipboard. "Any change?" "No, Seer. He won't eat until we leave. State evaluators are coming tomorrow. They'll decide if he's adoptable or needs sanctuary." "He's not broken," Marisol bristled. "He followed orders." Clay sighed. "The public's bleeding trust. No chief will deploy a dog tied to this case." They moved on. Shadow remained still. After they left, he rose, sniffed the food, and turned away. Instead, he lay by the gate, facing the corridor where Pierce once walked each dawn. That space was empty now. In the dark behind his eyes, memories bloomed: blood, bleach, a woman's scream, a child's whisper, bad dog. Shadow exhaled a soft whine. Not apology, not protest, just memory. When Marisol returned hours later, the food was untouched. She knelt and whispered, You're waiting for a command that won't come. Shadow blinked, and in that blink, she saw something human, understanding that silence, too, is an answer. She locked up, turned off the lights. In the dark, Shadow did not sleep. He simply waited, built of loyalty, bound by memory, and surrounded by a silence deeper than any cage. That evening, Camila returned home balancing groceries. Nina dashed ahead, pigtails bouncing. Inside, the apartment glowed with a soft light. Camila had swapped the harsh bulbs for warmer ones. It felt like breathing again. "Can I light the candle?" Nina asked, already reaching. Camila nodded. "Count to 10. The lavender candle flared to life, scent filling the room. Camila unpacked a small plush dog, floppy ears, stitched smile. "For me?" Nina asked, wide-eyed. "If you want him." The girl hugged it tightly. "This one listens," she said. Camila's throat tightened. "Yes, he does." They curled up on the couch beneath a quilt stitched by Camila's grandmother. Nina named the dog Rusty. "Rusty guards the door," she declared. "But let's friends in." Outside, wind tapped the windows. Sirens in the distance faded without dread. Camila noticed that difference, the way sound no longer startled her bones. Later, she poured chamomile tea and warm milk. They toasted quietly. "Cheers." Nina asked, "Is Mr. Pierce going to say sorry?" Camila hesitated. "He already did in court. Maybe one day he'll say it to us, too." Nina accepted that. "Rusty will keep watch." Camila smiled. Perfect training. That night, Camila read "Good night, little paws." When they reached the last page, "Good night to the brave who sleep, and the brave who watch over them," her voice wavered. Nina touched her cheek. "It's okay, Mommy. Rusty's watching, and I'm watching you, and I'm watching you." The echo made them both laugh. After putting Nina to bed, Rusty curled at her feet. Camila sat alone in the quiet. She whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, maybe to Grace, maybe to Justice, maybe just to the fact that some nights stay calm. Outside, the moon rose over the damp city. Reflected in the window, the candle's flame shimmered small, steady. It was enough. And for the first time since that awful night, Camila felt the house exhale. Morning arrived gently, as if it too had learned to tread carefully through Camila Reyes's life. Soft sunlight spilled through the curtains, laying golden stripes across the apartment floor. In the bedroom, a child stirred. Nina would soon wake. Clutching Rusty, the stuffed dog, ready for cinnamon toast and cartoons. Camila sat alone at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside a half-written journal. In this rare quiet, she allowed herself to revisit memory's rooms, the ones she'd avoided since the raid. She began to list what was taken. Sleep. Every creak, a phantom bootstep. Skin. A scar that still ached before rain. Trust. Doors now locked tight. A knock turned her stomach. Time. Lost hours in courtrooms and missed shifts. Words. Nina's voice gone for 42 days longer than any winter. Her pen paused. There was more money, dignity, anonymity, but naming it all felt less urgent now. She acknowledged the wounds, but they no longer defined her. She turned the page. What I found. Voice. In court, her hands had trembled. By the end, her words held weight. Elise, Elia, Grace, Devon, each standing beside her. Nina's courage. 2 small words, bad dog, had cracked a system wide open. A future. Nursing exams. Fresh flashcards. Plans, not panic. Belief. Neighbors waved. Strangers sent letters. A city began to ask harder questions. Camila closed the journal and looked around. A stub of lavender candle. A breakfast plate ready for Nina. The old Band-Aid tin, now filled with crayons. These small artifacts were her trophies. She moved to the window. Freight cars idled on rusted tracks, graffiti blooming across steel. Once, she hated the view. Now it felt honest, messy, in motion, alive. What was lost, she whispered, made space for what can grow. Her reflection met her gaze, tired eyes, shoulders straight, a face lined not with regret, but endurance. Behind her came a soft shuffle. Nina stood in the doorway, sock-footed and half asleep, clutching Rusty. She blinked at the light, then smiled an expression that had once disappeared from her vocabulary. "Morning, love," Camila said. "Smells like cinnamon," Nina murmured, leaning against her. They stood together at the window. "Mommy, are we still brave today?" Camila knelt. "Every day," she said, "even on the quiet ones. Brave can be quiet?" "The quiet kind," Camila said, tapping her heart, "is sometimes the strongest. It keeps beating no matter what." Nina pressed a hand to her chest, then to Rusty's. "We're all beating," she giggled. They moved through breakfast in a gentle rhythm, toast, butter, laughter over spilled sugar. The radio murmured about oversight reforms and community boards. Camila listened without flinching. There was still work ahead, but hope moved in her like warmth. As they ate, Nina talked about school. The letter D, she explained, now reminded her not just of dog, but of different. Because some dogs can be different than others. Camila smiled, awed by how a child could turn pain into vocabulary. After dishes, she returned to the journal. "More lists?" Nina asked. "Just one." Camila wrote, "What was taken will not take us." She underlined it. Then shut the book. Later, as they headed for school, the breeze fluttered the page open behind them. Sunlight shimmered across the ink before the journal closed gently, like a promise folded and kept. At the door, Camila locked up, double-checked out of habit, and breathed in the scent of wisteria and fresh cafe coffee. She reached for Nina's hand. Together, they stepped into the morning. On the street, life pulsed around them. A mail truck rumbled by. A dog barked from a balcony. Teens debated song lyrics on the corner. Camila felt her heartbeat sync with the city's. They were moving forward. Quietly. Bravely. Together. "What comes after brave?" Nina asked, skipping one step ahead. Camila considered, her smile soft and certain. "Living," she said. "We keep living." "Oh." And they did, turning the corner toward a day that belonged, finally, to them. Elijah Moore's office sat on the top floor of an aging brick building overlooking the courthouse square. The late morning sun streamed through warped glass, spotlighting dust motes that drifted like tiny satellites around stacks of legal pads and case binders. His desk, once spared clutter by habit, had transformed into a small mountain range of manila folders, all marked Lormont in Grace's precise hand. He ran a thumb along the latest delivery. 5 envelopes, each sealed with red evidence tape. Grace had slipped them through his mailbox at dawn, a note clipped on top. The last of it. Make them count. He recognized her tidy script controlled, but the bottom strokes carved a little deeper than usual, as if she felt the final weight of letting go. Elijah slit the first seal carefully. Inside, photocopies of deployment rosters, bite incident memos, and a chain of command email thread stamped confidential. He scanned dates 2017, 2018, 2020 years of silence given voice on carbon bleed paper. Each page throbbed with the same story. Unchecked authority, canine compliance, civilian wounds. He exhaled. Evidence wasn't the finish line. It was the starting gun. A knock at the half-open door broke his focus. Devin March leaned in, still limping but steadier than weeks prior. He held 2 coffees and a brown paper sack greasy at the bottom. "Figured you'd forget lunch." Devin set a cup beside the files. "How deep are you?" "Neck high," Elijah said, nudging the sack. "You join the cause? You feed the lawyer that the deal?" Devin managed a small grin. "Call it survivor solidarity." Elijah motioned to the opposite chair. Devin sat, surveying the paper peaks. "That all, Pierce?" "Pierce is one branch," Elijah said, tapping a folder. "But the roots run under the whole yard." He flipped open a notebook, revealing a rough outline. Proposed bill. K. 9. Accountability and Transparency Act. Mandatory body cam, syncing for handler and dog harness. Third-party review board for all bite incidents. Annual public release of deployment statistics. Psychological evaluation for dogs and handlers after any aggressive contact. Devin Reed. Eyebrows climbing. "You're writing law now?" Elijah shrugged. "Someone has to sketch the bones." He reached for his laptop, its screen already filled with a petition draft on a civic action platform. Title in bold: "Justice has teeth. Demand oversight for police K-9 units." Underneath, a counter sat at 74 signatures. Friends, law school peers, Grace, Camila, a handful of strangers moved by headlines. Devon sipped coffee. 74. Need a few zeros. Give it time. Elijah said. Movements start the way. Bites do a single point of pressure. Then they spread. He opened the second envelope. Inside lay an incident photo. He hadn't seen grainy cell phone shot of a young man on a curb, paramedic gloved hands pressing gauze to a thigh wound. The caption in Grace's scrawl. Unreported. Settlement number 9. Elijah placed it on a corkboard near his desk, beside Nina's courthouse drawing. Rusty Camila, a son wearing sunglasses. The juxtaposition felt deliberate harm and healing pinned by the same tack. His phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Press will circle by evening. Leak the draft? He typed back. Needs polish. But yes, before cycle resets. Devon watched him work. Think they'll listen? Public pressure talks, Elijah answered. Ballots listen to numbers. He clicked send on a mass email. Lawyers associations, animal rights groups, community organizers who'd reached out after the trial. Call to action. Sign and share. Let's legislate what courage exposed. Within minutes, replies chimed. Virtual thumbs up. Promises of amplification. A law professor offering pro bono policy language. The petition counter ticked upward 112, 139, 201. Devon let out a low whistle. Never thought a limp could end up part of something bigger. Elijah met his eyes. Every scar is a comma in the story we're writing. Emmy. The third envelope revealed disciplinary notes redlined by someone higher up, recommendations quietly downgraded. He photographed each page, uploading to a secure folder marked Futures. Because these documents weren't just receipts, they were blueprints for change. A calendar reminder popped. Meeting with Councilwoman Vega's aide, 3 p.m. Elijah scribbled a margin note. Bring survivor testimonials. Emphasize cost. Savings of preventing lawsuits. Politics loved numbers more than tears. Devon stood to leave, limping toward the door. Need me at City Hall? Not today, Elijah said. Heal. We'll need your voice at the public hearing next month. Devon hesitated. I'll be ready. When he left, Elijah leaned back, rubbing eyes gritty from nights of reduced sleep. Outside the window, protest chalk still colored the square. No more shadows. Rain had tried to wash it away, but the message clung, pastel ghosts haunting the pavement. He returned to the petition page. Signatures, 512. Comments poured like tributaries. For my brother bitten in 2019. I train service dogs, oversight saves, canine lives too. Nina's bravery lit the path. Elijah's gaze softened at the last. He thought of Nina's new plush guardian and Camila's quiet resolve. Legislation, he mused, is a lullaby that lasts longer than fear if we write it right. He opened a fresh document. K9. Accountability and Transparency. Act. Draft Summary. Purpose. To restore public trust, safeguard civilians, and honor the bond between trained dogs and responsible handlers. Section It. Body cam sync protocol. Words flowed dry. Precise. Necessary. Between each clause he saw faces. Cassie Vicks with her ankle scar. Devon limping. Camila at the window. Shadow lying still in a kennel waiting for silence to make sense. He wrote for them. Hours flicked by. Afternoon light shifted to copper. The petition ticker crossed 1000. Grace texted, Local station airing my files tonight. Elijah replied with a thumbs up emoji modern shorthand for keep going. He saved the draft, printed 2 copies, slid them into a slim blue folder. On the cover, he wrote in pen, Files and Futures. As he turned off the desk lamp, he glanced once more at the corkboard. Nina's sun drawing glowed faintly in dusk's last gleam, smiling down on the stack of hard, heavy evidence below. Let's turn paper into daylight, he whispered to the empty room. He locked the office door behind him, blue folder underarm, footsteps echoing down the stairwell sound of a movement, leaving the drafting table and stepping into the world. Night draped itself over Reveridge, in deep velvet, muffling sirens and softening street corner chatter into distant, harmless hum. On the 3rd floor of a weather-worn walk-up, Camila clicked off the kettle and let darkness settle. The only light came from a string of fairy bulbs Nina had insisted on tacking above her bed, tiny golden orbs that glowed like patient fireflies against lavender walls. Nina was already asleep, sprawled starfish over rumpled blankets. Rusty, the plush dog, tucked under one arm. The other stretched toward the twinkling lights as if she dozed off mid-wish. Camila lingered in the doorway, mug of chamomile cooling between her palms, heart easing into the gentle rhythm of her daughter's breathing. So much had shifted in so little time. Courtroom battles gave way to policy drafts. Protest chants faded into counsel. Meeting agendas. Some nights, Camila still startled at shadows in the hall, but the fear retreated faster now, chased by the certainty that truth once spoken cannot be returned to silence. She tiptoed across the room, careful not to wake the slumbering fortress of stuffed animals guarding the foot of the bed, and placed the mug on the windowsill. A breeze fluttered sheer curtains, carrying faint applause from a gathering 2 blocks away, neighbors holding a candle vigil for oversight reform. Camila closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her like distant ocean surf. Turning back, she eased onto the edge of the mattress. Nina's lashes fluttered but did not open. Camila brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead, marveling at how the simple act no longer felt like stitching together something broken, but rather tending a garden newly in bloom. Palms lightly against the blanket, she allowed herself to recount the journey one more time, in the safety of hush. The door burst. The dog lunged. The child watched. The night bled. The lie deepened. The silence settled. Then a courtroom. 2 words. A confession. And now, twilight peace. Camila inhaled, scent of lavender candle lingering faintly. She remembered Grace's parting words earlier that afternoon. After dropping off fresh cookies, healing's a long road, but roads are for moving forward. Camila had smiled, hearing an echo of her own newly minted mantra. Living comes after brave. Nina stirred, lips parting. Camila leaned closer, expecting the soft, nonsense murmurs of childhood dreams. Instead, the girl released a sigh shaped almost like speech. Dog is good now. The whisper floated between them, a feather landing on water barely sound, yet clear enough to stop Camila's breath. She felt tears prick, warm and sudden. Not tears of ache, but of astonishment. That healing, invisible as roots beneath soil, could surface in such plain words. She pressed a gentle kiss to Nina's temple. Yes, baby, she whispered back, voice trembling with gratitude. Dog is good now. Tears slipped free, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She did not wipe them immediately. She let them fall, baptizing the moment. Because in that small utterance, Camila heard an entire verdict. Not guilty forgiveness, not forgotten memory with its edges sanded smooth, not fearful faith that safety could exist again. Nina's breathing deepened, returning to the slow tide of dream. Camila finally dabbed her cheeks with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. She picked up Rusty, kissed the plush head, and tucked him firmly under Nina's chin sentinel and pillow in one. Standing, she adjusted the fairy lights dimmer until the room glowed like soft sunrise. At the door, she paused, hand hovering over the light switch she no longer needed to leave on. Tonight, she trusted the darkness to behave. Back in the living room, she opened her journal to a fresh page beneath the previous entry, where what was taken will not take us weighted like a century. She wrote, in careful script, the last word belongs to hope. She underlined twice, closed the cover, and placed the book beside Elijah's blue Files and Futures folder on the coffee table. 2 vessels, one of policy, one of heart, ready for whatever dawn asked of them. Camila settled onto the couch, pulling her grandmother's quilt up to her chin. Through the cracked balcony door, she heard wind chimes tinkle the seashell charm Jonathan Pierce had never shattered. A reminder that even fragile things could survive storms. She let her eyes drift shut. Images flickered. Shadow's quiet gaze in the kennel, Pierce's bowed head under courtroom fluorescence, candles flickering in Cedar Park, a petition counter climbing toward thousands, threads of pain, accountability, resilience, separate strands woven into a fabric stronger than fear. Sleep edged closer. Before surrendering, she whispered into the dark, words meant for no one and everyone. Good night, brave world. Keep listening. Somewhere beyond the city, a train horn sounded distant, unthreatening, a promise of movement, of tracks laid forward. And in a small bedroom bathed in fairy light, a child dreamed peacefully. clutching a dog that, in her world, would never bite. The truth, once fractured, mended quietly around them as the night curled inward. On a table, ink dried. In files, futures waited. In hearts, faith breathed. And in the hush that followed, the last word settled, holding fast. Good. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voice that stays with us. It's the quiet loyalty of a dog who never stopped believing. Stories like these remind us just how deeply animals, especially German shepherds, can connect with our hearts. They protect, comfort, and in their own wordless way, heal what the world breaks. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt they understood more than you said, you're not imagining it. That bond is real. And it deserves time, patience, and maybe a little guidance to grow even stronger. If you're interested, there's a lovely resource I've come across that helps deepen that connection, especially for those of us who believe our dogs aren't just pets, but part of the family. No pressure at all, but it's something I found helpful, and maybe you will too. Take care of yourself, and give your dog an extra scratch behind the ears tonight just because